Lord of Mystery, The Undead Don't Die from Passing Fire by author Ni Di Xun Zong. Chapter 261-275. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 261 Primal Moon. On the future, Frank Lee enthusiastically promoted as he led Klein to his room. Mr. Sparrow, would you like some baked potato tonight? It tastes like beef, it smells like beef, but it is indeed a potato. Will I get sick if I eat this? Klein replied indifferently. No need, I want to rest well. Okay, then I wish you sweet dreams. Frank Lee shrugged his shoulders and turned to leave with some regret. Watching Frank Lee leave and closing the door, Klein couldn't help but sigh. Everyone here is a talent, and they speak so nicely. The captain of the future, Star Admiral Katlia, is backed by the Moses Ascetic Order. However, because of this, she is also watched by the Hidden Sage, just like old Neil once was, on the verge of losing control. If he hadn't helped her, what would have appeared before him now wouldn't be a beauty with a melon seed face, fair and smooth skin, wearing a black classical long robe, but a monster with hundreds of eyes and hundreds of tentacles, wriggling like a slime. The first mate of the future, Frank Lee, the poison expert, with a bounty of 7,000 pounds. A former member of the Earth Mother Church, a biologist, of the planter pathway, sequence 6. From all perspectives, he is a cheerful and good-natured person, and his faith in the Earth Mother is also very devout. The only problem is that he likes to study hybridization. Not the hybridization of rice, but the hybridization of bulls, cows, and wheat, so that calves can grow like wheat. And because of his concept of hybridization, he was almost sent to the tribunal by the Earth Mother Church. At first, Klein felt some sympathy for him, but after hearing his hybridization concept, he suddenly felt that the Earth Mother Church was quite pitiful. The second mate of the future, Heath Doyle, the bloodless, with a bounty of 7,600 pounds, a Rose Bishop, of sequence 6. Although Frank Lee said that Heath Doyle was due to an accident, he was originally an ordinary person who was sprinkled with a potion formulated with Rose Bishop, Beander materials, was gradually permeated, and survived, eventually becoming a rather peculiar Beander. Because he didn't go through the listener stage, he wasn't polluted and didn't turn into a lunatic. As long as he doesn't actively use the listening Beander ability, he remains a normal person. Theoretically impeccable, but Klein rubbed his temples. Does this count as the subordinates following the example of their superior? Or is it being corrupted by bad company? The captain, Star Admiral, is on the verge of losing control, and her subordinates all have major hidden dangers. Of course, it's also possible that Katlia, due to her own tendency to lose control, has sympathy for Beyonders who are also ostracized and at risk of losing control, which is why she gathers them under her command. Although he hasn't divined yet, Klein always feels that this journey will not be smooth sailing. So, why not divine first? Empress Burrow, the luxurious villa of Earl Hall's family. Audrey stood behind the white gilded railing on the second floor, watching the servants on the first floor coming and going, busy. Karula leaned against the soft velvet pillow, lying on the luxurious bed in the bedroom, holding a glass of red wine in her hand, occasionally taking a sip. Audrey glanced at Karula, her eyes a little helpless. She seems a bit too lazy. Karula took a light sip of red wine and suddenly asked, "You seem very conflicted." Yes. Audrey nodded silently, and said softly, "The techniques taught by Mr. Fool were indeed effective, but I still can't defeat Gouda." Audrey felt a bit unwilling. Although the spectator pathway is not good at combat, and although the previous failures did not crush her fighting spirit but instead made her stronger. But even so, there was still some unwillingness to fail in her heart. Karula chuckled softly, and said lazily, "From the sequence perspective, Gouda is a demigod. And you are only sequence 5 now, isn't it normal that you can't defeat Gouda? Or do you think demigods are that easy to deal with?" Audrey retorted softly. "But that's the dream." Karula shook her head and said softly, "The dream is the same. A demigod is a demigod, not someone that ordinary Beyonders can defeat, even in a dream. So far, only one person has successfully passed Gouda's trial." A hint of surprise flashed in Audrey's eyes. Only one? Who could that be? Many people have entered the dream world, but they can generally be divided into two categories. One category is the sanguine, and the other is the Tarot Club members. And the first thing that came to Audrey's mind was the Tarot Club, not that she had any prejudice against the sanguine. It was just that the sanguine didn't have the guidance of Mr. Fool, so their success rate was naturally lower than the Tarot Club's. But if it was a Tarot Club member, who could it be? Audrey frowned and thought, first excluding magician and judgment. Like herself, they didn't have much combat experience, and their pathways were not suitable for one-on-one duels. Next, Sun was also excluded. Although Sun, who was in the forsaken land of the gods, had enough combat experience, his sequence was too low. Similarly, the possibility of the Moon and Hanged Man was also small, as they were only sequence 6 after all. And the ones Audrey thought were most likely to succeed were only Mr. World and the Hermit. Mr. World was someone she had never been able to see through, she didn't even know his pathway and sequence. And, Hermit, Miss also gave her a feeling of being powerful and mysterious, probably a Beyonder of sequence 5. Even compared to other Beyonders of sequence 5, her strength was among the best. In short, Karula stretched lazily, her perfect and graceful figure fully displayed, and she said in a languid tone. You don't have to be too modest. Although you couldn't defeat Gouda, among all the people who entered the dream, you can still rank in the top 5. What's more, for you, whether you can defeat Gouda is actually not that urgent. Audrey was silent. This was absolutely true. After all, she didn't need to digest the potion. Theoretically, she could even be promoted to manipulator now, becoming a demigod of sequence 4 in one league. Even without Karula's help, she could still do this. Because she didn't lack the sequence 4 Beyonder characteristic, nor the potion formula, all she lacked was a ritual. In a specific setting with at least 10,000 people, consume the potion amidst the great resonance of their emotions. The conditions for the ritual were not easy to meet, but for Audrey, they were not difficult either. For example, she could completely spend money to invite a famous singer to hold a concert in Backland, and all attendees could participate for free. This would easily organize a concert with tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands of people. And when the concert reached its climax, the emotions of the audience on the scene would also resonate. The only difficulty in such a concert was the extremely high cost of organizing it, which would cost at least hundreds of thousands of pounds. For most people, this was a huge sum of money they could never earn in their lifetime. But for Audrey, although 100,000 pounds was a lot, she could barely afford it. Well, barely. Because theoretically, the total value of the family property she could inherit was only 300,000 pounds, and the annual income was only 20,000 pounds. But Audrey had never tried to do this. She knew it wasn't time yet, although she didn't know when exactly it would be time. But for now, once she became a demigod, she wouldn't be able to enter the dream. This was obviously unacceptable to Audrey, who was eager to explore Ember's past. The reason she was so eager to defeat Gouda was also to know what Ember's past had been like. Karula seemed to see through her thoughts and said, if you want to understand his past through the dream, you don't have to. Huh. Audrey was startled for a moment, and hesitated. But, isn't what is shown in the dream Ember's past? Karula blinked her eyes and said with a smile. I never said it was. In fact, everything shown in the dream is not constructed by me. But Karula, aren't you the creator of the dream? Audrey became more confused and looked at her with some doubt. Well, let's put it this way. Karula propped her chin and gave an example. I'm just responsible for building the scene, but the one who designed this scene is actually King Sol. Or rather, it originates from the part of history reproduced in King Sol. But this part of history may not belong to Ember. Or rather, it may not all belong to him. Audrey pondered and asked, like one who understands the whole from a single instance. For example, the fact that you are a fire keeper. Karula's expression stiffened, and she looked at Audrey expressionlessly, emphasizing. I am a fire keeper. Audrey didn't argue with Karula on this point, and asked hesitantly. Karula, where did Ember go? Karula was silent for 2 seconds, then shook her head gently. I don't know. She knew Audrey was asking about Ember, but she really didn't know. If she knew, she wouldn't have to wait by Audrey's side like waiting for a rabbit by a stump. Audrey became even more confused. Why don't you know? Karula said softly. I only know that he is not in the present, but I don't know if he is in the past or the future. The girl's eyes, as green and bright as gems, suddenly widened. At this moment, even though she was a dreamwalker of the spectator pathway, sequence 5, she found it difficult to control her expression. Afternoon. Klein, who was on the future, entered the washroom and came above the gray fog. He summoned the members of the Tarot Club on time. On both sides of the mottled ancient bronze long table, blurry figures stretched and fixed themselves in the embrace of crimson light. The surroundings were as quiet and empty as ever, as if they had not been entered by living beings for thousands of years. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. Miss Justice Audrey's cheerful and pleasant voice soon echoed in the magnificent palace supported by stone pillars. Klein smiled and nodded, watching the members simply greet each other led by Miss Justice. Mr. Fool. Justice Audrey said respectfully. I have collected 3 more pages of Rosal the Great's diary. The long-awaited diary session. Klein raised an eyebrow, his mood suddenly becoming cheerful. Holding the 3 pages of Rosel's diary, Klein didn't read them impatiently as usual. After all, he had touched and used a Grade 0 sealed artifact, witnessed what the uniqueness of a Beander pathway looked like, and effectively intimidated this divine artifact. He felt that no matter what Rosal the Great wrote, it would be difficult for him to be too shocked. Unless a powerful entity with unique abilities cast a demoness's blessing on him, making him temporarily a woman. Klein made a joke in his mind and casually read the yellowish-brown parchment in his hand. April 1st, he contacted me again, in a dream. This time, I finally saw his true form. How to say it, well, he is a little smaller than I imagined. The first time I saw him in the abyss, he was fighting the cosmic dark side to the death. At that time, he was almost like a continuous mountain range, with no end in sight at a glance. At that time, I even felt like I saw the world serpent. Well, I mean Jormungandr, not that bug cause. But this time when I saw his true form, I realized that he is actually Verizimal. He was coiled in the magma, like a small mountain. His huge snake head was aimed at me, looking incredibly ferocious, but I unexpectedly felt a sense of familiarity. Until he turned his head. He turned his snake head, revealing a huge human face formed by the compressed scales on his back. FCK. That's disgusting. Klein's eyelids twitched as he read, knowing he almost couldn't help himself when he saw this sentence. That was a god. As a result, Emperor, your first thought was actually this. Are you really not afraid of being beaten to death? In short, that human face told me that he was Lekad. In the long game, he has always been suppressed by the snake body and could only be its subordinate. But after he successfully devoured the cosmic dark side, he and the undying great serpent successfully reached a balance. That's why I can stand before him and communicate with him, otherwise I would have been devoured by him in the beginning. It sounds a bit strange, but I don't think he is lying. A god, no matter how ugly he looks, he is still a god, and there is no need to deceive me, a mortal. He told me that he has an enemy, who is from the same place as him. He has been manipulating and playing with his body, and his enemy has driven him to eliminate countless deities. I think he was bragging about this part. And now, he wants to break free from this control, so he came to seek my help. Although I don't quite understand why a god needs the help of me, a mortal, I still asked him. Who is your enemy? He told me that that person was his sister. Princess of the Moon, Rani. Rani. Lekad. Klein frowned slightly. Princess of the Moon. I recall there are only 2 gods related to the moon, the Evernight goddess who symbolizes the scarlet moon, and blood ancestor Lilith who once held the red moon. Could this Rani be the legendary blood ancestor Lilith? Klein felt that the possibility was small, but then suddenly thought of another terrifying guess. No, there is actually another possibility. Primordial Moon. Chapter 262, now it's teaching time. Moon Princess. Klein's eyes flickered. In his heart, this Moon Princess was very likely the Primordial Moon. Mr. Dorr had also mentioned that the Moon card was vacant. And the tarot card corresponding to the Evernight goddess was not Moon, but the star. On the other hand, the Moon, Aemlin had also mentioned that the blood ancestor Lilith was still alive, but the Primordial Moon did not correspond to Lilith. He even suspected that the Primordial Moon was disguised by some evil god or high-level devil. Most of the people who prayed to the Primordial Moon would gradually change, becoming cruel, insane, and filled with reproductive desires. The rest, primarily sanguine, would likely lose control on the spot and turn into true monsters. So it was easy to conclude that the so-called Primordial Moon was actually a guise for a certain god. In essence, she did not occupy the sequence 0 position of the Moon pathway. Even Lilith might be disguised by a certain god, occupying the key point in advance to block opponents who wanted to ascend to the sequence 0 throne of the Moon pathway. In essence, she didn't truly care for the sanguine. The revelations she provided were just a test. Among them, the one with the biggest suspicion was the goddess who had taken the title of Crimson Lord. But combined with Rosal the Great's claim that Lekad came from the Celestial, Klein was more inclined to believe that the Moon Princess, Rani, was also a celestial visitor. Then, the possibility of her being the Primordial Moon became very high. And since Lekad could devour the cosmic dark side, who was a god, Rani, who could command and control Lekad, could only be stronger. And the most outrageous part was that these two were siblings. The younger sister used her older brother as a weapon, and the older brother, after regaining consciousness, wanted to kill his younger sister in return. What a truly loving family. Klein had quite a few feelings about this way of siblings interacting, and he turned his gaze back to the diary in his hand. Lacad told me that his current state was not stable, so he needed my help to spread his honorific name, the undying great serpent who devours the world, the rebel against the supreme will, the master of the abyss, the cosmic dark side, the king of blasphemy. I asked Lacad why all gods needed to spread faith. Lacad told me that this was a true god's means of self-preservation. Once reaching the level of an angel, any creature must use anchors to stabilize themselves and avoid being affected by the Beander characteristics' tendency to lose control in their mad essence. Even a true god is no exception. Because true gods possess strength far exceeding that of angels, but the tendency to lose control in mad essence they are subjected to is far stronger than that of angels. With just a slight carelessness, they will be dragged into the abyss of degradation. And faith is the anchor used by gods to resist madness and loss of control. In a sense, even a part of a true god's existence is shaped by the anchor of faith. This answered my long-standing confusion. Why do the 7 Orthodox gods' churches reject other evil gods? Why does almost every evil god have a secret organization that believes in them? Because faith is their anchor against madness and loss of control. Therefore, this has further strengthened my belief in reforming the God of Craftsman Church. As long as I successfully change the God of Craftsman Church's name to the Church of Machinery and change the God of Craftsman's name to the God of all machines, I can make him, under the influence of faith, become the Omniscia in my mind. Praise the God of all machines. Praise the Omniscia. Klein's eye twitched as he read, and he couldn't help but inwardly complain. Should I say it's indeed Rosal the Great? He truly lives up to not forgetting his original intention. Theoretically speaking, Rosal the Great was actually halfway successful. After all, the God of Craftsman Church did change its name to the Steam and Machinery Church under his influence. The next step was to remove the word Steam and change it to the Church of Machinery. Unfortunately, Rosal the Great seemed to have fallen out with the Steam Church in his later years, which prevented all of this from becoming reality. Klein frowned, feeling a bit confused. However, it seems that honorific names similar to the King of Blasphemy are not circulating now, right? During the 4th epoch, human factions that worshipped devils formed a loose alliance called the Blood Sanctify sect. This organization was severely fragmented internally, with the 3 great devil families, Nost, Andard, and Belial, standing like the legs of a tripod. But their ancestors had all received gifts from the abyss, so they also collectively worshipped the cosmic dark side, believing him to be the master of the abyss, the destroyer who would inevitably erode and corrupt the entire real world and the vast universe. And since the cosmic dark side had been devoured by Lacad, theoretically, he should have replaced the cosmic dark side. Just like the relationship between the mother tree of desire and the bound god, the faith of the mother tree of desire claimed externally that the bound god was her incarnation. Lacad could also completely claim that the cosmic dark side was the incarnation of the king of blasphemy. But the Blood Sanctify sect still worshipped the cosmic dark side, and it seemed that even the honorific name, King of Blasphemy, hadn't spread. This meant that Lacad might not have successfully replaced the cosmic dark side with his own honorific name. Could it be because Rosal the Great didn't spread his honorific name as Lacad requested? It's unlikely. After all, from Rosal the Great's diary, Lacad seemed quite amiable, although he was a bit ugly. Klein's thoughts gradually diverged. Rosal the Great's luck was actually quite good. In the early days, he had Mr. Dor and Zeratul, these 2 angels, offering advice to him. Although they both harbored malicious intentions and wanted to use Rosal the Great to achieve their respective goals, it's undeniable that they both made outstanding contributions to Rosal the Great's growth. Well, I, who am collecting Rosal's diary, also benefited a little. And Lacad, this true god, was the same. Judging from his entering Rosal the Great's dreams and Rosal the Great's attitude towards him, the 2 sides likely cooperated for a long time. During that time, Rosal the Great should have secretly had people spreading faith for Lacad in the dark. But as Rosal the Great became estranged from everyone in his later years, it's highly probable that Lacad's faith also disintegrated with Rosal the Great's downfall, or was even suppressed by the Eternal Blazing Sun Church and the Steam and Machinery Church. Of course, this King of Blasphemy, Lacad's reaction time also seems a bit long. Because Rosal the Great found the abyss on April 21st, saw Lacad on April 26th, and Lacad first entered his dream on July 8th. However, the time Lacad asked Rosal the Great to spread his honorific name was on April 1st. In other words, Lacad only remembered to ask Rosal the Great to help him spread his honorific name in the 2nd year at the earliest. Excluding the unrealistic possibility of a true god having Alzheimer's, Klein had a guess. That was, Lacad's state was not good. Although he had devoured the cosmic dark side, he seemed unable to completely digest the cosmic dark side. That's why he only entered the dream in the 3rd month after meeting Rosal the Great, and only remembered to spread his honorific name to stabilize his state at least a year after meeting. During this time, Lekad might have been fighting with the cosmic dark side for control of the body, in a dazed state. Lekad needed Rosal the Great to help him develop faith, hoping to gain the upper hand in his struggle with the cosmic dark side. And the cosmic dark side already had the faith of the Blood Sanctify sect. Perhaps it was precisely this part of the faith that helped him not be digested by Lekad immediately, but instead gain the qualification to contend for control of the body with the other party. And from the current perspective, it seems that the cosmic dark side has the upper hand, and might even have killed Lekad in return. Thinking of this possibility, Klein's expression suddenly became a bit subtle. Lekad devoured a god as soon as he appeared, which could be said to have shocked Klein for 800 years at the time. But looking back now, why does this, king of blasphemy, Lekad suddenly feel a bit low tier? As his thoughts flickered, Klein made the diary disappear from his hand. You may begin. He smiled and said to Justice, and the others. Justice, Audrey, changing her usual reserved demeanor, was the first to ask. Someone has already successfully defeated Gouda. Do you know who it is? So fast. Hanged Man slightly changed his expression. He was originally quite confident in his strength. But from the current perspective, his progress seems quite slow. No, it's not strange either. After all, he is only sequence 6, and it's not shameful to be behind a sequence 5 Beander. The moon, Aimlin almost blurted out. It's definitely not the Sanguine. As soon as he said this, the expressions of the Tarot Club members became a little strange. The moon, Aimlin also realized he had said something wrong and quickly explained. What I mean is, if someone among the Sanguine defeated Gouda, they would definitely be rewarded by Duke Olmer. Even if the Duke asked him to keep it a secret, he himself would definitely be unable to resist showing off. But since I haven't received any news, it means this person definitely isn't from the Sanguine. It would have been better if he hadn't explained. With the explanation, the expressions of the others became even stranger. What, the moon, said made it sound as if every single Sanguine loved to show off. Well, that's actually not false. After all, judging from the moon's behavior, the Sanguine indeed love to show off. As for whether other Sanguine like to show off, what they say doesn't count. Only, the moon, being Sanguine, has the most right to speak. And since the moon said so, it means it's very likely true. Hanged Man slowly said. I also think the possibility is low. Even he, who had guidance from Mr. Fool, couldn't defeat Gouda, so it's even more impossible for the Sanguine. The hermit, Catlia's crystalline purple eyes flickered slightly, a little surprised. Within this week, she had tried several times. Each time, she only barely managed to force Gouda to use that kind of black liquid, but she was still quite far from defeating Gouda. A demigod is a demigod after all. Even a demigod without any consciousness is not that easy to defeat. Justice, Audrey suddenly turned to the end of the bronze long table and asked. Mr. World, are you the one who defeated Gouda? Seeing that, the hermit was slow to respond, Audrey had already excluded her from the range of suspicion. The only remaining reasonable suspect was Mr. World. If she couldn't even believe Mr. World, Audrey really couldn't guess who else could defeat Gouda. Mr. World said in a hoarse voice. If only one person successfully defeated Gouda, then it's probably me. Indeed, Justice, who had already guessed, wasn't surprised. Instead, she felt a little proud. Our Tarot Club is truly too strong. Justice, Audrey secretly observed the reactions of the others. Sun's reaction was the most pure, his eyes filled with envy and reverence. Magician and Miss Judgment didn't show anything special, but they were also a little surprised. The moon seemed a little unconvinced, but didn't say anything, seemingly annoyed that this person wasn't him. And the expressions of Hanged Man and the hermit were somewhat intriguing. The former's expression was quite complex, while the latter looked at Mr. World without concealment, her expression quite surprised. Although both were surprised, Audrey could clearly feel that the hermit's surprise was different from Magician and the others. The reason was actually very simple, because Mr. World was currently on the hermit's ship. The hermit, Catlia asked cautiously. Mr. World, may I know how you defeated Gouda? This question, I also want to know. Justice, Audrey immediately said, Mr. World, I also want to know the answer to this question. Can I pay a corresponding price to obtain the relevant experience from you? Klein raised an eyebrow, pretending to be deep in thought. After a long time, he slowly spoke in a hoarse voice. Yes, this time it will be shared for free, no payment is needed. After the previous exploration, Klein had confirmed the guess in his heart. The dream world and the game world were almost identical, so the possibility of the subsequent bosses changing was not high. This meant that he could sell the information for each boss once. Since that was the case, there was no need to charge money for the first time. He could completely share it generously with others. This way, he might even gain a favor from others. After all, what's free is the most expensive. Mr. World feigned looking at the figure at the head of the table and respectfully said, "Mr. Fool, could you please restore the process of my battle in the dream world?" Fool smiled and replied, "Of course." As soon as he finished speaking, Fool waved his hand, and a vivid picture appeared before their eyes. This was simply Fool using the special nature of the Fool to materialize his own memories. But in the eyes of others, this was simply astonishing. Seeing the others staring intently at the materialized picture, Klein's expression suddenly became a little subtle. Is this considered a strategy guide tutorial? Connecting anytime across space, watching videos, online trading, why do I feel like this place is becoming more and more like an online dating platform? Justice, and the others didn't know what Fool was thinking. They all didn't want to give up this valuable learning opportunity and hoped to gain experience in defeating Gouda from Mr. World's experience. Chapter 263, The Resplendent Great Sun. After watching the battle footage of Mr. World defeating Gouda, there was a moment of silence and stillness above the gray fog. Because of the time constraints, the footage they saw was edited. But even so, they could see the reason why Mr. World was able to defeat Gouda. Strictly following the hints given by Mr. Fool. Although the process was extremely perilous, Mr. World's fighting style remained the same from beginning to end. Raise shield to defend, right pointing arrow, go around the back, right pointing arrow / once, right pointing arrow, raise shield to defend, right pointing arrow, go around the back, right pointing arrow / once, repeating the cycle. While this made the battle process extremely long and made the fight appear extremely dangerous and difficult, throughout the entire process, Mr. World seemed to be handling it with ease, and was not even injured by Gouda. Most importantly, Mr. World did not use his Beyonder abilities at all during the entire process. Using Beyonder abilities in combat was already an instinct for Beyonders. When Mr. Moon fought in the dream world, he even abandoned his longsword and directly fought using corrosive claws. Because for Mr. Moon, the corrosive claws he had used for over a decade were more convenient and far sharper than a longsword. At least, that's what he thought. However, in actual combat, the effect of corrosive claws was far less than that of a longsword. Similarly, the fighting styles of the Hermit and the Hanged Man were also like this. In their opinion, compared to an unfamiliar longsword, fighting using Beyonder abilities was undoubtedly more advantageous. That's why the Hanged Man, during their first encounter, tried to use flight to distance himself from Gouda and rely on aerial advantage to fight using wind blades, and then he was instantly killed by Gouda's jumping slash. Even after learning his lesson in subsequent attempts and no longer foolishly flying in the air as a living target, he still internally wanted to create distance and use wind blades for long-range attrition. The result, needless to say, was that he didn't even see Gouda's second phase. The Hermit was slightly better than him, at least she saw Gouda's second phase. Even before this, none of them felt there was anything wrong with their fighting style. It wasn't until they saw Mr. World's fighting style that they finally realized where the problem lay. They relied and trusted their Beyonder abilities too much, and instead lacked the most basic trust in dodging and parrying in the dream. Even with Mr. Fool's hints, they would instinctively remain skeptical. After all, no matter how strong the parrying and dodging in the dream were, they weren't their own, only Beyonder abilities were real. In Mr. World's style of completely abandoning Beyonder abilities and only using the dodging in the dream world for combat was undoubtedly beyond their expectations. Justice Audrey quietly sighed in her heart. Should I say that he's worthy of being Mr. Fool's favored one? Although everyone was a member of the Tarot Club and held reverence and trust towards Mr. Fool, the level of trust was clearly hierarchical. Others held back to some extent, while only Mr. World unhesitatingly followed Mr. Fool's suggestions, using them to make decisions and execute them strictly. This was something others couldn't do, and it was also the reason for Mr. World's success. Next time, perhaps I can give it a try. The Hanged Man's eyes flickered. There was no reason why he couldn't do what Mr. World could do without using Beyonder abilities. Don't be in a hurry to attack, and don't be greedy for extra hits. The Hermit Katlia suddenly recalled Mr. Fool's advice and murmured in a low voice. Although it was edited, the footage also showed that Mr. World's execution of these two hints was perfect. Before each battle, he would spend a long time observing. Without attacking, he would purely rely on blocking and dodging attacks to memorize Gouda's attack patterns. And during the combat phase, whenever he seized an opportunity to attack, he would only strike once, never a second time. That's why he was able to evade Guta's counterattacks, which always seemed dangerous but were perfectly timed. Even for the hermit, this held some reference value. Because even in the dream, defeating a demigod held immense significance for them. The hanged man hesitated for 2 seconds and asked, "Mr. World, how many souls can you get by defeating Guta?" Klein knew what he wanted to ask, and immediately controlled Mr. World to ask in a hoarse voice. 300,000 souls. I consumed 100,000 souls to digest the potion. 100,000 souls. The hanged man was thoughtful. This meant that by defeating Guta, he could completely digest the potion. But the problem was, he hadn't yet collected the Beander materials needed to concoct the potion. At sequence 5, the circulation of Beander materials is already rare and difficult to obtain. And between major factions, these Beander materials are strictly controlled, making it difficult for wild Beyonders to acquire them. Although the hanged man was a member of the Storm Church, he had advanced to sequence 6 in secret from the Storm Church. He couldn't tell the Storm Church about either the channel for obtaining the potion formula or the channel for obtaining Beander materials. So for the Beander materials to advance to sequence 5, he could only rely on himself to obtain them. Of course, he could also choose to return to the Storm Church and drink another sequence 6 potion formula. After digesting the sequence 6 potion formula again, he could wait a few months and then legitimately obtain the opportunity to advance to sequence 5 from the Storm Church. But if he did that, all his previous efforts would be in vain, and the sequence 5 feet ocean songster potion formula he had obtained at great cost would be meaningless. So he could only go all the way down this path. The hanged man took a deep breath, as if he had made some kind of decision, and said in a deep voice. Same as before, I need a ocean songster Beander characteristic, or the corresponding Beander materials. Facing the trade proposed by the hanged man, everyone else chose to remain silent. This was because the hanged man had proposed this trade a long time ago, but it had been vacant in the Tarot Club for a long time. After all, involving the sequence 5 level, both Beander characteristics and Beander materials were extremely rare and not easy to obtain. The hermit Katlia said, I can help you keep an eye out, but the possibility is not high. She herself was only sequence 5, and it wasn't easy for her to obtain a sequence 5 Beander characteristic either. The hanged man was not surprised by the hermit's answer, and said calmly. Just do your best. If the hermit could get the ocean songster Beander characteristic, that would be best. If she couldn't, the hanged man's eyes flickered. The headquarters of the Storm Church is on Pasu Island, but its missionary scope covers the entire Ruined Kingdom. For example, the Archbishop of Backland is Deep Blue Priest, Radar Valentine, and the Archbishop of the Rosed Sea is Sea King, Arn Courtman, both of whom are demigods in Ooze City. But even demigods cannot pay attention to every island and every town. Deep Blue Priest will not easily leave Backland, and Sea King will not easily leave Byam. And in the churches on those more remote islands, other bishops will be stationed. And these bishops vary in strength, the weak ones are only sequence 7, and the strong ones are even sequence 5. If the hermit really couldn't get the ocean songster Beander characteristic, then he could only take a risk and borrow from the bishops of those remote churches. But if he did that, he would inevitably offend the Storm Church. Although the hanged man was not very devout towards the Lord of Storms and didn't care even if he betrayed the Lord of Storms' faith, the Storm Church always imposed the severest punishment on traitors. If he betrayed the Storm Church, he would inevitably be ostracized by the entire Storm Church, and even hunted down by a demigod. But if it really came to that, he couldn't care less. Klein frowned, as if he had understood something from their conversation, and was about to make Mr. World speak when a dazzling light suddenly flashed in his peripheral vision. The light was so dazzling that it even brightened the gray fog a bit. Even the members of the Tarot Club were attracted by its light and subconsciously turned their heads to look in the direction the light came from. Among the thousands of deep red stars, a cluster of flames flickered. At first, it flickered like a candle in the wind, but the light of the flame grew brighter and brighter, obscuring the light emitted by the countless deep red stars, as if a resplendent great sun had been hung above the gray fog. Under the illumination of the dazzling light that resembled the sun, the surrounding gray fog seemed to be dispelled, becoming incredibly thin. Klein also came to his senses at this time, and a thought subconsciously flashed through his mind. Ember is back, but how did he come back? Where is he now? What does the anomaly above the gray fog mean? Klein felt a faint uneasiness in his heart, always feeling that things wouldn't be that simple. The last time Ember also returned to the past and then returned to reality, but that time the commotion was clearly not this exaggerated. What is going on? Klein's brows were tightly furrowed, and the members of the Tarot Club were even more confused, subconsciously casting their gazes towards Mr. Fool at the head of the table, trying to get an answer from him. Unfortunately, Mr. Fool also had a blank look on his face and didn't know what had happened at all. But Klein reacted quickly, knowing what he should do now. Has it begun? Mr. Fool murmured in a low voice, and before others could think, he slowly said. This gathering ends here. As soon as the words fell, Justice and others worsened, out of the gray fog and returned to reality. And Mr. Fool at the head of the table, the first moment others disappeared, materialized paper and pen and wrote down the corresponding divination statement. Ember's location. Empress Burrow, inside Earl Hall's luxurious villa. In Audrey's room on the second floor, the girl on the luxurious bed opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling above her head, with deep confusion in her eyes. What has begun? What did Mr. Fool's last words mean? Were he or they plotting something? And what did that sun represent? Audrey looked at the empty room, glanced around, and called out in a low voice. Karula, are you there? The room was silent, and Audrey's question received no response. Karula seemed to have left the room. On the main peak of the Amanda Mountains, snowflakes fell like feathers, covering the earth with a layer of white snow, adorned in silver. It was not yet night, and the cold red moon had not yet replaced the sun. But on this snow-covered peak, the sunlight still struggled to penetrate the snowflakes falling from the sky, unable to bring any warmth. A pointed Gothic black church stood alone in the snow-covered mountains. In front of it was a cliff, and in front of the cliff was a cemetery. The surroundings were all white, without a single sound. In the center of the cemetery, a bonfire with a spiral sword stuck in it burned quietly. No matter how the storm, snow, and rain raged, it did not affect the burning of the bonfire in the slightest. Even though it looked so weak, like a candle in the wind. Yet within it seemed to contain the power of gods, allowing the weak flame to burn eternally. Crack! The flame suddenly rose, accompanied by a crackling sound like burning wood. And the rising flame condensed into a figure around the bonfire. He wore melted and twisted armor, with a tattered cloak fluttering in the wind behind him, like a lonely knight. Good evening, favored one. A gentle voice sounded in his ear. Ember turned his head and looked in the direction of the Serenity Chapel. A lady stood quietly at the entrance of the cemetery, her dark eyes fixed on him. Her features were quite ordinary. She wore a simple long robe, tied with a bark belt, with long black hair hanging down, and was barefoot without shoes or socks. Ember recognized her. She was the head of the Black Knight Nunnery, the leader of the ascetics, the servant of concealment, the terrestrial angel, Ariana. Ember nodded gently and returned the greeting. Good evening, Lady Ariana. If it's convenient, I hope to go to the painting world now. Ariana said softly. As you wish, favored one, please follow me. This was not the first time she had heard this request, nor the first time she had responded to it. Because the goddess had already given a revelation about this. Ember glanced at the bonfire behind him, then withdrew his gaze. He silently followed behind Ariana, passing through the Serenity Chapel and entering the Black Knight Nunnery. It was a sacred and magnificent church, and everyone who came here would be amazed by its exquisite design. And when Ember first saw it, a trace of nostalgia flashed in his eyes. He had a very precious memory here once. Through a series of upward stone steps, bypassing the huge stone monument, they arrived at the church door. The closed door was engraved with complex patterns, and in the center of the left and right door panels was a guardian nun holding a long spear. And on either side of the door, there were also statues covered in white snow, standing with long spears in hand. Rumble. Ariana stood in front of the church door, gently waved her hand, and with a huge rumbling sound, the door slowly opened. The corridor illuminated by candles also appeared in their sight. On both sides of the corridor were a large number of kneeling stone statues of knights in armor with hoods. The knights on both sides held long spears in their right hands, pointing diagonally forward, as if lining up to welcome their master. Chapter 264 interrupting the rereading. He passed through the corridor. Appearing in Ember's sight was a prayer hall with a soaring dome. Slightly thin sunlight penetrated the clouds, scattering a few light spots within the prayer hall. But this church was, after all, just a replica. It only recreated the architecture, not the people. For instance, the giant judge in the prayer hall, almost as tall as the dome, or the church's gun, summoned to swear an oath to protect that princess. Perhaps moved by the scene, Ember stopped and took out an accessory covered in green rust from his pregnant. Open black lens bracket church's gun close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket an ornament of a green rusted bud. The bud is Princess Filianor's emblem. Equipping it makes you an oath taker of the church's gun. The church's gun is a guardian who protects the princess's slumber. When intruders invade the church, they have the mission of responding to the judge's summons, transforming into an oath spirit to hunt them. When this item is equipped, you will be automatically summoned. And as an oath spirit of the church's gun, you will be granted protection, close black lens bracket. Possessing the oath certificate of the church's gun meant that he had also once fought for that princess. Not to protect, but to liberate. To bring liberation to the princess, sealed in the ringed city, who could only be freed at the end of the world. There was no need for Ariana to lead the way. Ember looked towards the archway on the left at the end of the prayer hall and walked straight through. Behind it was a winding staircase leading upwards. On the platform at the top of the stairs, there was an extinguished bonfire. Whoosh! A faint flame slowly ignited from the ashes, restoring some warmth to the long-cooled bonfire. Ember calmly withdrew his hand and looked to the right of the platform. At the end of the corridor, there was an elevator room that led directly to Philionor's chambers. Rumble. Stepping on the circular stone slab in the middle of the disc, amidst the roaring friction. The elevator room was activated, and the disc slowly ascended. When the disc reached the top floor, the spire, solidified under the twilight, also appeared in Ember's line of sight. Ember didn't hesitate for a moment, ascended the stairs to the top of the tower, and arrived before the closed door. Rumble. With a heavy grinding sound, the door was slowly pushed open, revealing a gap just wide enough for one person to pass through. Passing through the gap, Ember saw a princess. A princess wearing a pure white long dress, holding a giant egg with a cracked shell, and in eternal slumber. Philionor. Ember murmured softly, his gaze slightly lost as he looked at the girl's exquisite face. Although he knew this was just a painting and not the real Philionor, he couldn't help but fall into memory. Long ago, the world was not yet differentiated, shrouded in a great fog. Everywhere there were gray rocks, towering great trees, and immortal ancient dragons. Then, one day, the first flame ignited. With the rise of the fire, the world began to show differences. Heat and cold, life and death, light and dark. Then, several species born from the dark, attracted by the fire, found the king's soul around the fire. Nido, the first of death, the demoness of Izalith, Sun King Gwyn and his knights. After gaining the king's power, they challenged the ancient dragons. Gwyn's lightning pierced the rock-like scales, the demoness's flames formed a storm, and Nido unleashed a death miasma. And with the betrayal of Seath the Scaleless, the ancient dragons were finally defeated, and the Age of Fire began. In Rodland, this is a well-known legend and history. But not the entire history. Because among those who found the king's soul in the dark, there were also, unknown, insignificant humans. And these, unknown, insignificant humans also participated in that dragon-hunting war, remembered in history. As the victors of the dragon-hunting war, the gods resided high in Orlando, ruling the world. The demonesses obtained Izalith, their status extraordinary. Nido controlled life and death in the entire natural world and everything beyond nature. He resided deep in the darkest part of the giant's graveyard, and no one dared to step into his domain, not even the gods. Even Seath the Scaleless, the ancient dragon trader, became Sun King Gwyn's relative as a duke and received a portion of Gwyn's great soul. He even brazenly conducted inhumane research as a duke in the Grand Archives, hoping to achieve immortality. They all obtained everything they desired, except for humans. Even though humans were also victors of the dragon-hunting war and made indelible contributions to this war, they remained unknown. Because the reward they received was the Ringed City. It was the location of the end times. It was a place of exile created by the gods for the dwarves. It was a segregated city with towering walls. To completely erase the influence of the dwarves, mere exile was far from enough. The dwarves' achievements, their contributions in the dragon-hunting war, and even traces of their existence were completely erased the moment they entered the Ringed City, becoming unknown from then on. But even so, the gods still placed multiple seals on the dwarves who entered the Ringed City. Not only the dwarves themselves, their weapons, their armor, everything they knew was placed under the seal of fire. And the reason for all this was exactly as Kaz said. Great King Gwyn deeply feared the dark. He worried about the fire extinguishing, feared those who belonged to the dark, and worried that humans might give birth to a dark lord, fearing the cycle of nature. So he constantly linked the transferring fire, ordered his children to lead, constrained humans, making you humans forget everything, live in ignorance, and avoid the birth of the Dark Lord. Kaz was undoubtedly a liar, but he was a clever liar. He would not deceive you with pure lies, but rather guide the undead using the truth towards the path he desired. Gwyn did indeed deeply fear the dark, so he exiled the dwarves to the Ringed City, placed the seal of fire on everything belonging to the dwarves, made humans forget the dwarf kings of the past, and forget that their ancestors had also participated in the great undertaking of the dragon-hunting war. Just as the description of the dragon head shield says. In the past, the ringed knights were requested by the gods to join the ranks of dragon hunters. But their achievements would never be praised. When the dwarves were exiled to the ringed city, when everything about them was placed under the seal of fire, and all traces left in Rodland were erased, the only thing that could bring them comfort was perhaps the youngest daughter of the Sun King, Princess Filianor. The ringed city was the location of the end times, a place of exile created by the gods for the dwarves, but the dwarves were unaware. They naively believed that the ringed city was a paradise like Izalith, a reward given by the gods in recognition of their achievements. And perhaps to mislead the dwarves, Sun King Gwyn, while bestowing the ringed city upon the dwarves, also bestowed his youngest daughter upon them. Open black lens bracket small envoy banner close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket a small banner used by the envoys of ancient great King Gwyn. Hold this aloft facing the ringed rock wall, and a carrier will come. It is said that the great king gave the ringed city, the location of the end times, along with his beloved youngest daughter, to the dwarves who obtained the dark soul. This is proof that one day he will go to greet her, close black lens bracket. Filianor perhaps knew the truth, which is why the Sun King promised that one day he would come to greet her. But this was ultimately just a lie. Until the end of the world, the gods failed to fulfill their promise. And Sun King Gwyn, perhaps, never intended to keep his promise. Gwyn was a king, but certainly not a hero. Perhaps at the moment he gave his youngest daughter to the dwarves, he had already foreseen Filianor's fate. The dwarves, in their rage upon learning the truth, would cruelly murder her, the youngest daughter of the Sun King. However, none of this happened. The dwarves who learned the truth were angry, and perhaps their hearts were also filled with resentment. That's why the ringed knights took off their helmets, donned black cloths soaked in the abyss, and specifically covered their eyes with multiple layers of cloth. This was their faint resistance against the gods, so that the seal of fire would not completely annihilate everything unseen. But even so, they still sincerely loved and supported Princess Filianor. Until the end of the world, until Slave Knight Gale massacred the dwarf kings who survived the slaughter with severed legs still struggled to crawl towards Filianor's chambers, attempting to seek salvation from this princess. And Filianor. Perhaps she resented the father who abandoned her. But she was still performing her duty, fulfilling the agreement with the gods. She sealed the dark that Gwyn feared at the cost of her life, and fell into slumber from then on. Midir, a descendant of the immortal ancient dragons, always faithfully guarded her side, devouring the overflowing dark, until he himself was consumed by the dark and suffered greatly. Even betrayed, abandoned, and with the gods long gone, she still fulfilled her mission. Towards the gods, she had already been benevolent and righteous to the extreme. All that remained was salvation. With a hint of nostalgia in his eyes, Ember gently reached out and touched the giant egg in the girl's arms. Crack, crack. The moment the eggshell was touched, it shattered into pieces, finally collapsing like a building. It broke into pieces on the girl's long dress, revealing the deep dark inside the white eggshell, a stark contrast to the outside. Sacred light then bloomed, completely illuminating the entire room and enveloping Ember's body. Ariana stood just outside the door. The light was one step in front of her, but it did not leave the room by a single step. She calmly watched all this happen. Everything was the same as the last time, seemingly without any changes. "O King, please accept all of me." The girl's gentle voice echoed in Ember's ears, and Ember slowly raised his head. The blind princess was smiling as she reached out her hand towards his head, and warm flames flowed like water from her palm into Ember's body. That was the king's soul, one of the 9 divided king's souls. It was a farewell gift that the former Ember had personally given her, and now it was merely returning to its rightful owner. Ariana stood quietly at the doorway. When the light dispersed, she returned to the room. The layout of the room was unchanged. On the giant painting was a girl of indescribable beauty. In her arms, she held a giant egg that was cracked but largely intact. And Ember, who had just entered the room, was nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have returned to its original state, without any changes. Ariana grabbed the door frame, seemingly wanting to close the door and leave. But just then, her peripheral vision suddenly caught the faint smile on the lips of the girl in the painting. Ariana's expression shifted slightly, as this time it seemed different. But she still did nothing. She just quietly closed the door, letting everything return to peace. She returned the way she came, went down the stairs, and took the elevator back to the lower level. Passing through the corridor guarded by knight statues, she saw the extinguished bonfire at the end of the stairs. The burning just now felt like a fleeting illusion. The bonfire was still cold, without any temperature. Ariana made 4 clockwise dots on her chest and whispered, "May the goddess bless you, favored one." She then went down the stairs and left the church. The sun had already set by now, and the scarlet moon had just peeked out, appearing slightly dim under the cover of dark clouds and thin mist. But suddenly, the scarlet moonlight reflecting on the snow-covered ground outside the church deepened and intensified. Ariana looked up and found that the dark clouds and thin mist in the sky had dispersed, revealing a red moon slightly more than a semicircle. Its outline quickly filled out, and in just a second or two, it became a full moon, a blood-red full moon. Blood moon. Ariana's lips moved slightly, and she murmured to herself with a touch of surprise. Among the goddess's titles is Crimson Lord. But Ariana knew that there were other beings contending with the goddess for control of the Scarlet Moon. Just like this occasional blood moon, it was not entirely controlled by the goddess. Favored One had come to the Church of the Night almost every day for the past few months, but why did the blood moon appear specifically today? Ariana was puzzled, then suddenly seemed to understand and looked down the mountain. There, a figure in tattered armor was ascending the mountain step by step, reaching the church step by step amidst the heavy snow. The Serenity Chapel under the night was exceptionally beautiful, complementing the red moon hanging high in the sky, coldly illuminating the earth. But he was not in the mood to appreciate this beauty. He merely glanced at the graveyard beside the church. There was a stone coffin in the graveyard, but the lid had long been lifted, revealing an empty interior. He shifted his gaze from the bonfire in the graveyard, which was still quietly burning even amidst the heavy snow, and calmly looked at the church ahead. At the entrance of the Serenity Chapel's great door, a figure had appeared in his line of sight at some point. It was a lady with ordinary features, dark eyes, wearing a simple long robe, tied with a bark belt, with long black hair hanging down, without shoes or socks, and with bare feet. The abbess of the Black Knight Nunnery, the leader of the ascetics, the servant of concealment, the earthly angel, Ariana. Good evening, favored one. Ariana looked up at the tall figure before her and greeted him softly. He did not speak, merely gazed calmly at the lady before him, and after a while, slowly said, "Take me to the painting world." "All right." Ariana gently nodded and said, "Favored one, please follow me." He quietly followed behind Ariana, passed through the Serenity Chapel, and entered that familiar yet unfamiliar building. Welcomed by rows of kneeling knight statues, they entered that prayer hall. Chapter 265 Crazy and Stupid. Klein looked at the golden ocean outside the window, his eyes flickering. They arrived at this ocean in the early morning. But just now, the sunlight outside the window suddenly became bright, shining fiercely, illuminating the restaurant in an unusual mess. The boundless ocean outside seemed to be burning with golden flames, as if it had been in a state of midday. Klein raised his head and squinted his eyes. He saw that the sky was full of direct sunlight, with no clouds and no sun visible, just a golden-yellow expanse. The magic mirror erodes described this place as an unreal ocean, a place left over from the God War ruins. As his gaze swept across, he noticed a ruin not far ahead to his left. Most of the ruin was submerged in seawater. What rose above the surface were piles of gray stones and pillars stacked into peaks, with something like a dome at the top. It used its own curvature to create a considerable space. This ruin must have been incredibly huge originally. Through the transparent seawater, Klein saw that it extended all the way to the seabed below, without end. God War ruins. Klein murmured in a low voice. The sun is the authority belonging to the eternal blazing sun. This is where the gods once fought, and the residual power of their battles still echoes. Besides the eternal blazing sun, there might be remnants of the power of other gods. However, there is no historical record of this war that once triggered a battle between several gods. But Klein had already vaguely guessed the answer. Because from the secrets he understood, there was only one god war he knew of for sure. That was the time when 6 of the current 7 gods simultaneously attacked the ancient sun god. This is a very dangerous ocean. Star Admiral Katlia had arrived beside him at some point. Abyss. Bernadette murmured in a low voice, her pupils losing their anxiety, appearing somewhat lost in thought. They had escaped from that seemingly boundless dark ocean and arrived at the seemingly endless mountain. Behind the mountain was still an endless expanse of gray fog, which seemed to cover an entire continent in the haze. This was her first time entering the abyss, and likely her last. After all, if it weren't for the puppet's request, she would never have set foot in this domain in her entire life. Regardless of whether she could leave the abyss safely, this would be her last time here. However, this abyss was completely different from what she had imagined. It was very quiet here, a deathly silence. Legend has it that the abyss is the devil's paradise, but so far, they had walked all this way and seen nothing. Let alone devils, they hadn't even seen the corpses of devils. Descending along the mountain, there was a winding downward path, as if it could lead directly to the continent shrouded in black fog. But if you looked down from the mountain peak, you would find that there seemed to be no bottomless abyss below. Bernadette had a premonition. If she hadn't followed the small path down the mountain, but had leapt down relying on her strength as an angel, she would be in perpetual freefall, never reaching the end. Bernadette's eyes were full of vigilance, even though she was an angel. Because there are always some great powers in this world that even angels cannot resist, and the abyss is precisely one of them. Bernadette was about to cautiously continue exploring downwards when the petite puppet on her shoulder suddenly spoke. "Stop, right here." Bernadette stopped, a hint of confusion in her eyes. Having already reached this point, shouldn't they continue to go deeper? As this thought just surfaced, a full moon suddenly appeared before her eyes. It was a cold and dark mysterious moon. It rose from somewhere unknown, hanging high above Theaski, of the abyss. The bright moonlight was extremely penetrating, and even the black fog that seemed to be able to corrode gods could not stop the spread of the moonlight. Bernadette's breathing stopped because she had seen this moon before. But that was outside the cosmos, and now this moon reappeared in her sight, in the abyss. Under the moonlight, the entire abyss seemed to boil. The world was dyed deep blue by the cold and dark moon, and the rolling black fog quickly dissipated into nothingness. The original mountain and the bottomless abyss all disappeared, leaving only that cold full moon before her eyes, with an endless azure ocean all around. The ocean was like a mirror, reflecting Bernadette's figure, but it was impossible to see what was hidden beneath the ocean. But the next moment, the scene before Bernadette's eyes changed again. Her gaze penetrated the surface of the sea, and she saw the boundless black fog beneath the surface, as well as the continent shrouded by the black fog. But suddenly, the black fog shrouding the continent suddenly vibrated, and the fog, which was like liquid, now seemed to be stirred up into monstrous waves, surging and boiling incessantly. And beneath that boiling, black sea, the continent slowly stood up. It was only then that Bernadette suddenly saw clearly, where was that a continent? It was clearly a giant snake like a continent. Its thick and round body stretched out of sight, seemingly boundless. As Hes stood up, the black fog was separated, as if making way for their master, their king. On that hideous snake head, two scarlet eyes were staring intently at them, staring at that cold and dark moon. Swoosh! The giant snake flicked its scarlet tongue and suddenly opened its huge mouth, biting towards them. Bernadette withdrew her gaze in horror, and at the same time, the giant snake suddenly rushed into the moon's domain. Above the azure sea surface, a terrifying giant snake was coiled in a corner, flicking its tongue and staring intently at them. Bernadette recovered slightly, but her heart was still filled with an unspeakable fear. That giant snake was undoubtedly a true god. Even though he looked incredibly fierce, like a beast without consciousness. Even though his current size had shrunk by tens of thousands of times, from the size of a continent to less than 100 meters long now. But he was still a god. The petite puppet spoke calmly. "Lacad." The giant snake stared intently at her, but remained coiled, not daring to rush forward rashly. The giant snake named Lacad suddenly turned around, facing them with its back. And on the snake's back, between those hideous snake scales, a huge, hideous human face was watching them. Or rather, watching the petite puppet on Bernadette's shoulder. The human face's expression seemed somewhat solemn, and he said in a deep voice, "Leave here." The puppet's gaze remained calm, without a ripple, and she said softly, "You seem to have regained some consciousness." Lacad said in a deep voice, "I have gained liberation, Rani." Rani paid no heed, and said unhurriedly, "That's good. Now you can better fulfill the mission given by the king." Rani. The petite puppet tilted her head as if a little confused, looking at the giant snake roaring with anger, and asked softly, "So, what do you want to say?" Lacad said in a deep voice, "Rani, I am your brother, you should set me free." Rani was unmoved, and said calmly, "My brother died the moment you swallowed him. What remains is just a struggling undying great serpent. You can inherit his name only because I like to call you that, it doesn't mean you are really him." And Rani touched her fingers together, and her tone also became cold. "It is the king's mercy that has allowed you to live until now. Do you mean you were unwilling to continue serving the king?" Lacad was once her brother. During the Shattering War, they, as siblings, were each other's most loyal allies. Even in that night of conspiracy, Lacad was involved. Before the king appeared, Lacad was her first choice for the plan. It was just a pity. The once ambitious tyrant eventually succumbed to the taboo of immortality, and as an undying great serpent, he devoured all the noble knights who had served him. Only the most base greed remained of the once noble king. The reason he was able to live until now was entirely due to the king's mercy. If he dared to betray this mercy, then he had no reason to live. Rani's expression was incredibly calm, as if she was just catching up with a brother she hadn't seen in a long time. But even as an observer, Bernadette could hear the cold killing intent contained in that indifferent voice. Lekad's originally towering giant snake body suddenly lowered its head, coiling into a ball, and the human face's voice was low. Last time. Okay. Rani nodded lightly, calmly withdrawing her gaze. As expected, this would indeed be the last time. As for you. Lekad extended his snake head again, reaching towards Bernadette, a hint of surprise seemingly in his eyes. You have a scent on you that is familiar to me. Ah, I remember, it's him. Are you his daughter? Him. Bernadette's eyes flickered, and she asked in a low voice, Do you know my father? Of course. A trace of memory flashed in Lekad's eyes, and he murmured in a low voice like an old person. Your father once came to the abyss. We once cooperated. It was a very pleasant experience. What was his name again? Ah, right, Rosal Gustav. Bernadette's expression shifted slightly. She had never heard her father mention this. Not only her, but no one in the world knew that Rosal Gustav had once been to the abyss. Was he deliberately hiding it? Or was it covered up by someone? When did that happen? If he had been to the abyss, what about other places? Had he been to other areas considered taboo? Bernadette. Lekad suddenly began to murmur in a low voice, Ah, I remember, Bernadette, he often mentioned you in his dreams. Bernadette's expression became increasingly complex, just like her feelings for her father. Bernadette was silent for a long time, and hesitated before asking. In your eyes, what kind of person was he? The petite puppet watched all of this calmly, not attempting to interrupt their conversation, nor stopping it. Lekad pondered for a few seconds, seemingly thinking, and after a long time, he chuckled in a low voice. Madness, stupidity. Your father was very mad, but unfortunately too stupid, so the only thing he can be remembered for is failure. Bernadette remained silent. In his later years, he was indeed exceptionally mad. He'd personally destroyed the kingdom he had built. So from an outsider's perspective, he appeared both mad and stupid at that time. But Bernadette had always believed there was another hidden story. And now, a god's evaluation of him was also mad and stupid. What exactly did he do? A strong urge suddenly surged in Bernadette's heart, wanting to understand what her father had done. Because she suddenly realized that her understanding of him was only on the surface. Bernadette didn't know why he came to the abyss, or why he got involved with Lekad. What happened between them, and what exactly did they plan? Did other gods influence his sudden transformation of the Republic into an empire? Were the things he did in his later years manipulated by someone? Time passed minute by minute, and lunch was quickly prepared. Klein was about to leave the deck and head to the restaurant when he suddenly noticed that the surroundings had become dark. The sky, which had been in a state of midday, no longer had sunlight, completely enveloped by dense darkness. This change was so fast, so sudden, that Klein's first reaction was that someone had turned off the lights. Silently, the future was covered with a layer of brilliant starlight, illuminating the paths leading everywhere. Hermit Catalya's slightly magnetic voice was amplified once again, echoing in everyone's ears. Return to your rooms, or find a corner somewhere, and make yourselves fall asleep. Then wait to wake up naturally. Poison expert, Frank Lee asked loudly in confusion. What happens if we don't sleep? At this moment, his voice rumbled, as if a giant bear was speaking. Catalya stood behind the captain's cabin window and said, When we wake up, we will find that you have disappeared and can no longer be found. Klein raised his eyebrows slightly. He did not doubt that Catalya was being alarmist. Because what had just happened had confirmed that Catalya had some understanding of this place, and Klein was also relieved for the first time that he had hired Hermit Catalya instead of Hanged Man. Otherwise, they would have been burned to ashes by the sudden golden carriage at noon, because they looked up. Just as he was about to get up and return to his room, Catalya's voice suddenly came from beside his ear. The night will make us enter a shared dream. Dream. Klein's expression shifted slightly, and he asked in a low voice, like the other dream. Catalya was not by his side, but he believed she could hear him, because this was on her ship. And the other dream he knew of course, referred to the dream created by Karula. Hermit Catalya was silent for a while, and said softly. Similar, but more dangerous. Don't explore deeply. Klein's face became serious. Since Catalya said so, he certainly wouldn't court death by exploring the dream. However, Klein suddenly had a bold idea. What would happen if he prayed to Karula at night and entered the Dark Souls' dream? Or rather, if both dreams were pulling at him, which dream would he enter? Or would he be unable to enter either? Catalya didn't say anything more, and Klein didn't dare to delay. He didn't try to enter the gray fog, nor did he really try to pull frantically between the two dreams. Instead, he quickly returned to his room and made himself fall asleep. He didn't dare to challenge the great power of the gods casually. Chapter 266, Absolutely Amazing. Above the gray fog, Klein took off the now quiet creeping hunger and threw it into the pile of miscellaneous items. He had successfully advanced to Sequence 5 Marionettist with the ritual assistance of the mermaids singing. And because he was on Star Admiral's ship, Klein temporarily couldn't find food to feed creeping hunger, so leaving it above the gray fog was the best option. Phew. Klein calmed down for 2 seconds and glanced at the figure sitting beside the mottled bronze long table. He then left the palace, which was like a giant's dwelling, and walked towards the depths of this mysterious space above the gray fog. Before, he had discovered a stairway of light leading to a heaven-like place, and suspected that the number of layers was related to his sequence, so he came to confirm it as soon as he advanced. After walking for a while, a sacred staircase composed purely of light finally appeared before Klein's eyes. Compared to before, it had gained an extra layer out of thin air, totaling 5 steps. As expected, Klein sighed without surprise. Then he climbed the staircase, which seemed prepared for giants, and reached the top level. At this point, he was not far from the patch of gray fog suspended in midair. It seemed that with just one more layer of steps, he could climb onto it. Klein subconsciously looked up and vaguely saw something. It was an almost completely transparent object, like the shell of something, sometimes retracting a little and disappearing from Klein's sight, and sometimes extending outwards as if blown by an invisible wind, revealing some outlines. Klein was silent for a long time, then slowly took out a mottled human figure, dotted with some sparks, seemingly molded from ashes. That was Soul Ember. Months ago, Ember had given him this Soul Ember as a reward. However, Klein had never known where exactly this Soul Ember should be used. He originally thought it would be used as a beacon, to allow Ember, who was lost in the river of history, to return to the present. But this idea was quickly dismissed by him, because Karula and others, who possessed King's Soul, were clearly much more dazzling beacons than Soul Ember. If the light of King's Soul was the bright moon, then Soul Ember was a firefly. How could the light of a firefly compete with the bright moon? So, for a long time, Klein had speculated that perhaps Soul Ember was truly just a gift for him. And now, that speculation had become reality. Because Ember had already returned to the present and didn't need his help. Hesitating for 2 seconds, Klein ultimately exerted a slight force and crushed Soul Ember. Puff! Soul Ember was crushed, the ashes scattered and drifted with the wind, and the internal flame exploded in an instant. With Klein as the anchor point, it transformed into a brilliant cloud of fire, fiercely burning the surrounding gray fog, making the hazy scene that was originally enveloped in the gray fog gradually become clear. The 6th step did not appear, and Klein still couldn't reach the top of the steps. But standing on the 5th step, he could still clearly see the scene above the steps. It was a brilliant light door stained with some dark green and black. It was composed of countless layers of overlapping light spheres, and the body of each light sphere was a pile of twisted worms clustered together, some transparent, some semi-transparent. In addition, from above the light door, hung thin black threads, suspending one almost completely transparent cocoon after another. Those cocoons swayed gently, each encasing a different soul body. Some with black skin, some of Asian descent, some white people, some wearing jeans, some holding mobile phones, some with brightly colored clothes, some with beautiful features, all with the breath of life, yet their eyes were tightly closed. Klein's gaze froze instantly, as if he had returned to Earth, walking on a street with people of all races. Then, he noticed that 3 cocoons had already broken open, empty inside, swaying in the wind. Klein, looking up, silently watched all of this, quietly watching. Crack! The flame completely extinguished at this moment, and the distant gray fog rapidly filled in like seawater, filling the blanks burned by the flame. The light door was again enveloped by the gray fog, and the cocoons on it also became hazy. In Klein's sight, only a deep green, almost black color stood quietly, like the color of trees in a dark forest. Silent for a long time, Klein silently walked down the light staircase and returned to the side of the mottled bronze long table. That figure was still sitting beside the mottled bronze long table, quietly watching him. Klein looked at the head of the bronze long table, at the huge stone-carved chair. It was inlaid with dim gems and gold, and seemed not prepared for humans. This huge chair was empty and heavily mottled, as if it had undergone the baptism of long years. The first time he came here, he only felt lost. Gradually, he learned to use the special nature of the fool to create convenience for himself. And now, only confusion remained in his heart. Silent for a long time, he did not, as usual, simply sit down on the huge chair at the head of the table with a thought. Instead, he walked step by step towards the chair and slowly sat down. Klein looked at the figure on his right, remained silent for a long time, and suddenly asked, "When did you discover it?" Ember was not surprised by his question and spoke slowly. "The time I explored Amon's mausoleum, Aemon told me this place is called Saphira Castle." Aemon. A hint of understanding flashed in Klein's eyes. He knew Ember had explored that mausoleum, because he was the one who gave Ember the information about this mausoleum. He also knew that Ember had encountered Aemon in the mausoleum, but he had no way of knowing what exactly happened in the mausoleum. Saphira Castle. Klein murmured in a low voice. This was the first time he knew the true name of the fool. Amon's clone had lurked in the City of Silver's prison for decades, yet suddenly attacked precisely when Sun prayed to Fool, just to use Sun's hand to invade Saphira Castle. At that time, Klein had already guessed that this was definitely not a simple coincidence, but a long-planned scheme. And now the reason was also obvious, the Beander characteristic convergence law. Aemon was also attracted by Saphira Castle, he wanted to obtain Saphira Castle. So, what is Saphira Castle? The uniqueness of the seer pathway? Or a higher-level existence? Probably the latter. After all, Aemon was not from the seer pathway, but the marauder pathway. Moreover, if it were merely a uniqueness, Saphira Castle would not be able to withstand the invasion of eternal blazing sun and evernight goddess. Klein got the answer from Ember, but at this moment, he became even more confused. Just with these two words, you guessed everything. Ember slowly said. Aemon also told me that if I wanted Saphira Castle, he could give it to me. He doesn't necessarily have to become weirdness, nor does he want to bear that fate. Because this would cause the first master of Saphira Castle to resurrect in him, just like the first resurrected in his father. And I saw two completely different titles on you. Ember pointed at Fool Klein at the head of the table, then pointed at the end of the bronze long table, where there was nothing. But Klein understood instantly and cooperatively materialized world. Having become a marionettist, he no longer needed to rely on the all-black eye and could directly control world. After world was condensed, Ember slowly spoke. And on world, you are open black lens bracket full close black lens bracket, and world is open black lens bracket celestial worthies benefactor close black lens bracket. Celestial worthies benefactor. Klein's heart sank immediately. There was a lot of information, but he could roughly understand it. He was Fool, and world was him. But world was not open black lens bracket fool's benefactor close black lens bracket, but open black lens bracket celestial worthies benefactor close black lens bracket. This meant that the person, Klein Moretti, was a benefactor of celestial worthy from the very beginning. And celestial worthy undoubtedly referred to that celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings, the weirdness, in Amon's words, the former master of Saphira Castle, and also the direct reason for his transmigration. That light door was perhaps created by this celestial worthy. He, Rosal the Great, and another unknown transmigrator senior appeared in this world, all thanks to that celestial worthy. And the reason he could enter Saphira Castle was also by chanting the honorific name of this celestial worthy during a ritual. Aemon said that the first once resurrected in ancient sun god, which means celestial worthy will eventually resurrect in him. But I'm only sequence 5. Klein cried out helplessly in his heart. Just thinking that another person would replace him made his scalp tingle. Because the first impression in his mind was the scene of an alien bursting out of a host body. Klein took a deep breath and asked in a deep voice, "Why are you telling me this now?" Ember was silent for a long time. Just as Klein's mood became increasingly tense, Ember slowly spoke. "Is there a possibility that you were the one who initiated the topic?" Quote. Klein opened his mouth, then showed a bitter smile. It seemed he really was the one who initiated the topic. Seeing that light door, his state of mind had somewhat collapsed, and he even had a self-abandoning thought. His mind was a mess, not knowing what to do, which was why he couldn't help but think and directly laid his cards on the table. Laying cards on the table feels good for a moment, but the aftermath is a crematorium, and a crematorium, in the true sense. Klein asked, half nervous and half jokingly. "So, I'm going to be burned." Ember nodded lightly. "Almost, but what's going to be burned is Saphira Castle." Saphira Castle. Klein raised his eyebrows. While relieved, he was also a little confused and asked doubtfully. "Can I ask why?" Ember didn't hide anything and said frankly. "My current state is similar to yours. You can simply understand it as first fire will resurrect in me, or first fire will be completely refined by me. The final result depends on the ownership of the 9 king souls. And this world also has 9 Saphira. The 9 Saphira can be used to strengthen the essence of King Soul. The more Saphira integrated, the greater my chances of winning." Klein suddenly understood, but at the same time, he had a new guess. 9 King Souls. 9 Saphira. Does 1 King Soul just happen to correspond to 1 Saphira? This was probably planned long ago. Klein thought for 2 seconds and asked. So, you have one king soul in your hand now? Yes. Ember nodded gently. Klein gave a bitter smile and said helplessly. Honestly, your honesty makes me a little uncomfortable. Ember's tone remained calm and said frankly. You are currently equivalent to half the master of Saphira Castle. If I want to refine Saphira Castle, I need to get your acknowledgement. Of course, I can also choose to forcefully refine it, but the difficulty will be much greater. Klein seemed to understand something, pondered for 2 seconds, and asked. What should I do? Ember looked at Fool and said calmly. Become stronger, until you can completely control Saphira Castle. Control Saphira Castle. Klein frowned. But aren't you going to refine Saphira Castle? What I want is ownership, but this doesn't require depriving you of the right to use it. Then why not let others use it? Like Karula. They can't get in. Can't get in. Klein got the answer and inexplicably thought of that light door again. So, only the celestial worthy's benefactor, who emerges from the cocoons hanging on the light door is qualified to enter Saphira Castle and become half of its master. This is actually easy to understand, because it's similar to Ember's state. Karula is the holder of King Soul, considered half the master of King Soul. But even if others come into contact with King Soul, it's impossible for them to become its master, because King Soul was given to Karula by Ember. And Saphira Castle is similar. There are many members in the Tarot Club. Even angels like Karula can be pulled above the gray fog to participate in the Tarot Club. But there is always only one fool, and it can only be Klein. It sounds reasonable, but Klein's instinctive reaction was that this was a lie. Because if that were truly the case, why would Eamon still invade Saphira Castle? Didn't he just want to become the master of Saphira Castle? Since Eamon could replace him, why couldn't others? However, although Klein still had doubts, he did not point it out. Whether Ember was trying to comfort him or had other reasons, at least this matter itself was beneficial to him. Moreover, instead of being forcefully entered by first fire, Klein was more inclined to choose Ember. At least Ember was willing to explain things to him calmly and had no intention of snatching anything from beginning to end. Klein had already made a decision in his heart and was about to speak, but suddenly heard Ember speak. The essence of King Soul and Saphira repel each other, just like first fire and the first. Saphira instinctively fears contact with King Soul, so King Soul holders cannot enter Saphira, let alone become its master. And to make the fusion of King Soul and Saphira smoother, both sides need to be effectively controlled. King Soul is controlled by me, and Saphira is you. I can completely control King Soul, but you are only half the master of Saphira Castle. So the fusion process will be very slow, until you can completely control Saphira Castle. Klein could understand what Ember wanted to express, but was also a little surprised. Then how did you get in? Ember gave him a strange look and slowly spoke. Is it possible? Got it, stop talking. Klein resisted the urge to cover his forehead with one hand and remembered that he was the one who forcefully pulled Ember in. Absolutely amazing. Chapter 267 Psychotherapy. After Ember left Saphira Castle, Klein, who was still sitting high up, rubbed his temples and murmured. So, I don't have to do anything now. Klein's mood was quite subtle at the moment. On the one hand, he felt the joy of being carried by a powerful player while playing a game. On the other hand, he felt a deep sense of powerlessness, because he was being carried. He was like an accessory during team fights, only able to watch the powerful player show off, while he could only spectate from the sidelines, otherwise, the aftermath could kill him. After all, he had just advanced to Sequence 5. As soon as he reached Sequence 5, he had to face off against a king of angels at Sequence 1 or even a true god at Sequence 0. Although with Saphira Castle hiding in the spring, it wasn't impossible to briefly contend with these existences. But Saphira Castle wasn't omnipotent, because there was also the celestial worthy, secretly plotting how to take him over. I'm bearing pressure I shouldn't have at my age. Klein sighed deeply. Why did it feel like the whole world had suddenly become his enemy? Eamon wanted to snatch Saphira Castle, the celestial worthy wanted to take him over. These were just the threats that had appeared on the surface. There were countless people watching him in the dark. The only thing Klein was grateful for was perhaps Ember. Ember had likely recovered some of his memories, although he didn't know the specifics. But at least he was no longer thinking of burning himself, but rather of burning Saphira Castle. This was good. Although Saphira Castle sounded very grand and was Klein's golden finger that he relied on to survive, Klein didn't feel dissatisfied with Ember's desire to refine Saphira Castle. Instead, he felt a strange sense of joy. After all, Saphira Castle being on him meant that he would become the focus of those at Sequence 1, or even Sequence 0. Just knowing the existence of this pressure was enough to make Klein restless. If these people really came knocking, Klein didn't think he could defend Saphira Castle. And if Saphira Castle no longer belonged to him, then Ember would bear this pressure. Klein could instead hide in the dark and secretly develop, free from worry. Furthermore, compared to Saphira Castle being taken by others, Klein was more willing to hand it over to Ember. Because Ember could have just taken it directly, and even the key to enter Saphira Castle was given to him proactively by himself. But he still chose to discuss it with himself, who was only half the owner of Saphira Castle, and even gave him the right to choose. At least Ember had been benevolent and righteous, there was no reason for him not to accept. And the sincerity Ember showed, even if it was faked, still made Klein feel respected. Of course, this was also related to the fact that Ember already knew that Fool was Klein. The friendly attitude the other party was currently showing was also inseparable from Klein. After all, Klein and Ember were also friends who helped each other. Otherwise, Ember would probably have chosen to take it by force, because that way he could also conveniently burn Fool as fuel. Klein's eye twitched, and he shook his head violently. Don't do that. It's okay to lose Saphira Castle, but being burned is absolutely not allowed. Although losing his golden finger would make him a little reluctant, it wasn't to the point of being inseparable. What's more, given Ember's personality, he would definitely provide enough compensation. Klein had no opinion on this, after all, he didn't have much obsession with becoming stronger. Although his advancement speed was a bit exaggerated due to Saphira Castle, this was actually forced. If it weren't for Ince Zangwil and Lannis plotting the birth of the true creator, perhaps he would still be a Sequence 7 now, still working with the captain in Tingen, and having dinner with Benson and Melissa after get off work. Melissa disliked Benson's cooking, but her own cooking wasn't great either, so it was highly likely that he would cook himself. And during dinner, he would have a beer with Benson, while Melissa would take a tiny bite of lemon pudding, chewing it repeatedly, reluctant to swallow. How nostalgic. A trace of nostalgia was in Klein's eyes. He missed that life at that time. Although it was brief, it was already one of the few things in his life worth remembering. But soon, Klein's mood became low again, falling into a long silence. Perhaps I should see a psychiatrist. Klein gave a bitter smile and muttered in a low voice. His spiritual intuition told him that his current state was very wrong. If he left Saphira Castle like this, it would cause irreversible damage to his body and spirit. Simply put, he needed to confide now. Ember might be a good person to talk to. He might be able to understand his current situation. But Klein didn't think Ember was someone who would comfort others. For this kind of thing, it was better to find a professional. Klein's gaze shifted to the first seat on the left. Empress Burrow, inside Earl Hall's family's luxurious villa. Dad, how is Alfred doing now? Has he digested his potion? Audrey, who had finished lunch, looked at Earl Hall at the head of the table and asked. Not that fast. Earl Hall put down the Backland Daily in his hand and smiled, shaking his head. Audrey, you're a Beander, you should know that digesting a potion is not something that can be done overnight. What's more, Alfred is still at Sequence 5. According to the royal family, most people need at least a year. But you don't have to worry too much. No matter what, this spot belongs to the Hall family. And, we should have a little more confidence in Alfred, shouldn't we? He has always been excellent, perhaps he can complete the digestion of the potion within half a year, before the social season. I see, Audrey murmured in a low voice. She believed that Alfred could complete the digestion of the potion within half a year. But if Alfred entered the dream world, this process might be faster. Yes, Hilbert could too. He was now a clown at Sequence 8. Every day after work, he would go to the circus to act. This was undoubtedly a very embarrassing experience for Hilbert, who always pursued elegance. So he never told his family, always claiming he was working overtime. But unfortunately, this clumsy lie couldn't even fool Earl Hall. If Hilbert knew that the dream world could help him quickly pass the clown stage, he would definitely not refuse. Well, it took Mr. World 100,000 souls to digest the Sequence 6 feet potion. Then, Sequence 8 probably only needs 1,000 souls. This doesn't require challenging Gouda, nor challenging experts and crystal lizards. You just need to clear out the zombies in the Ash Cemetery every night, about 2 or 3 times. In other words, it only takes 2 or 3 days for Hilbert to digest the potion. Audrey was stunned for a moment. She suddenly realized that the dream world seemed to be more effective for low-sequence beyonders. Although low-sequence beyonders were weak in strength, they were destined to be confined to the Ash Cemetery. But the number of souls they needed to digest the potion was not large to begin with. Sequence 8 only needed 1000 souls, and Sequence 9 only needed 100 souls, while killing any zombie would yield at least 20 souls. And it just so happened that the Hall family had been expanding rapidly recently. Audrey had personally handled hundreds of Beyonder characteristics, and she clearly knew how large the scale of Beyonders the family was currently cultivating. With so many people, potion digestion was not something that could be done overnight, it required accumulation over time. This was actually what the nobles often called foundation, and the Hall family was in the process of accumulating this foundation. And the dream world could accelerate this process countless times. Perhaps I can give it a try. Audrey murmured in a low voice. Try what? Earl Hall was a little surprised. Audrey blinked. I mean, try a new hairstyle for Susie. Woof. Susie, who was happily eating steak next to her, looked up, her dog face confused. Audrey silently hid this idea in her heart, planning to ask Karula about it the next time she saw her. After all, although Karula hoped she would help promote the dream world. But low-sequence Beyonders were somewhat special, and she didn't know if Karula would allow it. Just then, she suddenly saw the boundless gray-white fog and the blurry figure sitting high above, overlooking everything. Immediately after, she saw another figure, a praying figure shrouded in gray fog, and the corresponding words echoed in her ears. Mr. Fool, please tell Miss Justice that I wish to receive some psychological treatment. Psychological treatment? Audrey was a little surprised. Did Mr. World have psychological problems? Although Mr. World had always appeared very reclusive and gloomy, Audrey didn't think that was a psychological illness. As Rosal the Great said, solitude is one person's carnival, carnival is a group of people's solitude. Mr. World might have just chosen to be reclusive, which didn't mean he had a psychological illness. But now that Mr. World was actively seeking help, it meant that he must have been under a lot of pressure recently. Audrey didn't dare to delay. She got up, took the golden retriever Susie, and returned to her room. The person and the dog had a great understanding. Without verbal communication, the latter stood guard at the door, acting as a sentry, while Audrey locked the room door and sat by the bed, silently chanting the honorific name of Mr. Fool. After waiting for a few seconds, a crimson light surged out before her eyes, drowning everything. Audrey arrived at Saphira Castle, inside that magnificent and ancient palace. Audrey said in a clear voice. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool, Mr. World. Mr. World said in a hoarse voice. Miss Justice, if possible, I would like to receive psychological treatment now. Huh, here. Justice Audrey was stunned for a moment. Beyonders of the spectator pathway were indeed very suitable for treating psychological illnesses. But this was inside Mr. Fool's palace, and there were many details she couldn't see clearly or sense, which severely lacked the conditions for treating psychological problems. Hesitating for a moment, Audrey raised her doubts from a feasibility perspective. Mr. World said in a low voice. It's okay, I asked Mr. Fool to provide some help. Audrey frowned slightly. She always felt that there was something wrong, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. After thinking carefully, she found that there was indeed nothing wrong, so she nodded gently and said, I have no problem. As soon as she finished speaking, Audrey immediately saw a small room appear next to the bronze long table. It was a half-height brown large box with a door on the front and back, separated in the middle by a wooden board. I thought Mr. World would ask Mr. Fool to materialize a wall, and he and I would be on opposite sides, leaning against the wall to communicate. Although the essence is the same now, the confessional is small and dark. He really doesn't consider a lady's feelings at all. If Mr. World did consider them, I would find it strange. Audrey felt a slight smile appear as she walked to the door of the confessional, that hadn't been closed yet, bent down and crawled in, kneeling diagonally. Closing the wooden door, Audrey, who was treating a patient for the first time in a real sense, suddenly felt a little excited. Being in the darkness, she let go of many rules she usually followed due to the environment and her emotions. She slightly raised the corner of her mouth, curled her fingers, and lightly tapped the separating wooden board, saying, Hello, is Mr. World there? Klein, sitting cross-legged on the opposite side, was infected by Miss Justice's cheerful tone and said with slightly relaxed emotions. You can begin. This time, he did not use the gray fog to conceal himself, but had changed into Gairman Sparrow's appearance. Audrey's spiritual intuition had already sensed the surface state of the other party's mind-body, which was the common understanding of emotions, or rather, mood. Gloomy, low, confused, depressed, uninterested in anything. Mr. World had indeed encountered a very serious problem. For ordinary people, maintaining such a mood for a long time would make them depressed and no longer interact with outsiders. And for Beyonders, overly low emotions could even lead to their loss of control. Audrey lightly bit her lip, made a calm judgment, and used an appease at the right time. This was one of the most useful abilities of a psychiatrist, called psychoanalysis, in ancient times. A gentle, invisible wave spread out. Klein immediately felt the sensation of waking up on a hot summer day and being blown by the cool morning breeze. His low mood improved slightly. Mr. World was silent for a long time, then slowly opened his mouth and said, "You once obtained information about dragons from Sun, so you should have some understanding of the dragon of imagination. If, and I mean if, you discovered that your father, mother, and brothers were all conjured by the King of Angels of the spectator pathway and didn't actually exist, how would you react? Definitely collapse on the spot, or even lose control. Did Mr. World discover that his main expectation or ultimate goal could never be realized, and thus developed psychological problems?" Audrey was first inexplicably terrified by Gehrman Sparrow's question, and then she realized the essence of the problem. She didn't answer, but asked in a guiding manner, "You seem to have witnessed the shattering of a hope." "Hey!" From the wall behind Audrey, a self-mocking laugh came through. "Indeed, I once thought I still had family, but later found out that this was just my extravagant hope." That intense pain and confusion were so vivid in Audrey's senses that she suddenly had an epiphany. The gloomy, suppressed, experienced, and ruthless Mr. World also had his own goals and meaning for existence that he pursued. Chapter 268, Coincidence. When Klein saw that door of light, and those cocoons, his spirit was struck by a flood-like impact, feeling all his expectations were shattered, and his originally mature worldview, outlook on life, and values collapsed with them. However, Lu Xuan once said, "The temperament of the people of Chong country is always fond of compromise and moderation." For example, if you say this room is too dark and a window must be opened here, everyone will surely object. But if you advocate for tearing down the roof, they will come to compromise and be willing to open a window. The current situation is quite similar, but also different. If that door of light and those cocoons opened a window on the house of Klein's, 3 views, then Ember directly lifted the roof off. Compared to having the roof lifted off, opening a window wasn't so difficult to accept. Just as Miss Justice said, the door of light and the cocoons shattered his hope. At that moment, Klein felt as if he had lost his future, but Ember directly made his present precarious. This, lifting the roof, action temporarily suppressed Klein's negative emotions about opening a window, and when he realized Ember wasn't actually tearing down the roof, but merely lifted it up to play with before putting it back, the crisis regarding his present was also resolved. But at the same time, the negative emotions generated by opening a window surged into his heart once more. Fortunately, with the precedent of lifting the roof, and the psychological counseling from Miss Justice, Klein's precarious 3 views finally stabilized. Phew. Klein exhaled, forcing his thoughts back to those cocoons, and when he saw that scene, his instinctive reaction was a certain extremely high-level existence, or a certain sealed artifact, at the same time, using different methods, grabbed a large number of people from Earth. Among them, some used the transmigration ritual, some bought strange silver plaques. Then, the soul bodies of these transmigrators were sealed within cocoons, suspended on the door of light, waiting for a certain opportunity to appear to be sent into the real world. According to Klein's observation, that door of light currently has no intelligence and operates purely on instinct. This means that as long as the conditions are met, it will catalyze a cocoon and send the soul body inside into the body of a specific target. From the current perspective, Klein speculates that there are probably 2 conditions that need to be met. First, there are no other transmigrators ahead, or that transmigrator has been determined to have failed or died. Second, a call from a certain thing, item, or ritual, just like the black divination Klein Moretti performed according to the Antigonus family notebook. And now Klein can basically confirm the existence of that extremely high-level existence is the former owner of Source Castle, the Celestial Worthy. And the reason why these catalyzed Earthlings, can borrow a corpse to revive in this world. Perhaps it is precisely because that Celestial Worthy wants to gradually cultivate them into powerful Beyonders, and then possess them. This way, it can be well explained why the Emperor and I were in the same era on Earth, not differing by more than a year, but transmigrated more than 200 years apart. Because we transmigrated at the same time, but were released in different eras. Before entering the real world, the Emperor and I had both slept for who knows many years. Brothers from the bunk next door. Klein leaned back against the chair, his gaze flickering slightly before returning to its deep, somber state. There were 3 shattered cocoons, meaning there were 3 transmigrators in this world. He and the Emperor occupied 2 of them, so who was the 3rd one? Klein's first suspected target was undoubtedly Elven King Sunyasolam. This ancient god invented chopsticks, could make blood curd, liked eating animal offal, was very skilled at using spices, and the mainstream facial features, hair color, and eye color of his descendant races were close to those of Asians on Earth. Not only did Klein once suspect he was a transmigrator, Rosal the Great also had the same feeling. And another suspect was the ancient sun god, the creator worshipped by the City of Silver. The main symbolic element of the ancient sun god was the cross, and Jesus Christ also had the cross. He named his children Adam and Ammon, and these names can all be found in Earth's mythology. Adam was the first human created by God Almighty from dust in his own image. Ammon was the seventh-ranked demon among King Solomon's 72 demons, whose ability was to know the past and future, and to make friends turn against each other or reconcile. Adam was the eldest son of the ancient sun god, corresponding in meaning to the first human created by God in his own image. And the blasphemer Ammon, at the angel level of the marauder pathway, could deceive fate, trick rules, and become a parasite of time. And this ability was also extremely similar to Ammon among the 72 demons. Furthermore, the 7 gods and even other evil gods all had their respective angels, but only the angels under the ancient sun god displayed images with wings of light, fitting the image of angels under God Almighty in mythological stories. Klein even felt that the word, angel, might have been invented by the ancient sun god. Because during the second epoch, there were also sequence 2 existences under the ancient gods, but at that time they were called vassal gods. The word, angel, perhaps originated from the 8 king of angels under the ancient sun god. These details, I didn't think much of them before, but now thinking about them carefully is terrifying. Klein hissed, actually thinking the ancient sun god's suspicion was greater than Elven King Sunyasolim's. The other party's experience was simply too legendary, more like the protagonist of an era than Rosal the Great. Of course, his ending was also quite tragic, being betrayed by his disciples, which also fit the ending of Jesus. Was this also part of your plan? Klein muttered. Although it was a joke, Klein felt the possibility wasn't small. That betrayal might have originally been planned by the ancient sun god. Because Ammon said that the first awakened in his father, this must have happened before that betrayal. Perhaps this betrayal was also an attempt made by the ancient sun god to get rid of the first. He might have wanted to get rid of the first by shedding the identity of the ancient sun god, and then be reborn as the true creator, reclaiming his original power. But no matter what the truth was, the outcome definitely ended in failure. Because the true creator is now just an ordinary evil god, and the secret organization that believes in him is also wanted by the 7 gods' churches. From this perspective, the rebirth was successful, but the attempt to reclaim power failed. This rehearsed betrayal might have ultimately evolved into a true betrayal, and the ancient sun god's power was thus divided. Besides this, although Ember was also a transmigrator, he went to the Dark Souls world. Although the reason is unknown, it is likely unrelated to the celestial worthy. After all, what the celestial worthy wanted was to possess them, these transmigrators, while Ember's current actions were to possess that celestial worthy. What's more, Ember went to the Dark Souls world. And the reason why the painting world of Dark Souls descended was also due to the pull of a certain item, or a certain existence. Klein speculated that the item pulling the painting world to descend might be Saphira. King's soul can complete itself by merging with Saphira, so Saphira might not necessarily be unable to merge with King's soul in return. And this might be the essence of pull. Based on this, Klein had another bolder guess. King's soul has owners. Whether it is Ember or First Fire, they are the owners of King's soul, and they are vying for the ownership and control of King's soul. What about Saphira? King's soul has owners, so Saphira might also have owners. Just as the celestial worthy is the owner of Source Castle, the other 9 Saphira might also each have owners. Or perhaps these Saphira originally belonged to the same existence, but were divided into 9 parts due to some human reasons. Just like First Fire was evenly divided into 9 King souls. And who would this existence controlling all Saphira be? Klein's eyes flickered slightly, having a faint guess, but not daring to jump to conclusions yet. Forget it, let's not think about these for now. Klein rubbed his temples, temporarily setting aside these cluttered thoughts. Although these matters cannot be said to be directly related to him, they definitely have an impact. After all, Source Castle is with him, and sooner or later, it is already being targeted by at least 3 gods and 2 angels. Figuring out what happened in the past would be of great help for him to understand his current situation. But he is ultimately just a sequence 5, and many things, even if known, might not have a solution. Instead of worrying himself, he might as well just give up. If he really encounters other angels or even gods invading, at worst he can ring the bell and call for help. Klein, also has someone backing him now. And compared to these, he now just wants to return to Backland as soon as possible. Benson, Melissa. Klein thought of his two relatives waiting for him in Backland, and his eyes softened. He witnessed the shattering of hope, but at least he hadn't lost everything yet. On the future, Klein returned to reality, washed his face with clean water, and then walked out of the washroom. He was just thinking if it was time for dinner and was about to take out his gold pocket watch to check the time when his vision suddenly darkened, making it almost impossible to see his fingers. Klein frowned, gave up the idea of leaving the room, and quickly walked towards the bed. Using meditation, he entered the dream. In the dream, as soon as he woke up, he found that his location had changed once again. The last time he left the dream, he was on the large rock where Star Admiral, Catalia sat with her knees hugged. Now, he was at a stairwell. The twilight light shone through the high stained glass, making the spiraling black staircase covered in reliefs exceptionally beautiful. Klein instinctively looked to the side. A lady stood at the stairs leading to the upper floor, watching him intently. She wore a pair of beige trousers suitable for movement and black leather boots that weren't short, but her upper body was covered by a light brown knee-length skirt, its hem falling diagonally, showing a bit of unrestrainedness and stylishness. This combination of clothing instantly gave Klein a feeling of dreaming back to earth, because no similar style had been popular in countries like Loen, Intis, or even Fersac, Fenboot, Leuenberg, Masick, East Balen, etc. But when Klein clearly saw the lady's appearance, his body couldn't help but stiffen. She had naturally falling chestnut long hair, straight eyebrows extending just right, and blue, deep eyes, as if condensing an ocean. She possessed outstanding beauty, but this wasn't the most eye-catching aspect. The nobility naturally revealed in her demeanor and the aura of a significant figure who had long been in a high position were more impressive. And precisely because she was so impressive, Klein clearly remembered this lady. He confirmed that he had seen her on the White Agate during his first voyage. After the White Agate arrived at Byam, Klein had not seen her again. But now they met again in the dream, which meant the other party was very close to him in reality. Because only people who are close in reality are pulled into the same dream. Tap, tap, tap. The lady who gave off a condescending feeling walked step by step to face Klein, pulled out a chair, and sat down. "We meet again," the lady said in a gentle but completely emotionless tone. Klein suppressed his inner emotions and asked with an indifferent expression, "I believe our meeting isn't a coincidence." Since he started his voyage, the other party had been following him. But now she suddenly revealed herself. What exactly did she want to do? The lady opposite gathered her chestnut long hair and gently shook her head. "No, it's a coincidence." This answer made Klein stunned. "You call this a coincidence?" the lady said in a gentle but indifferent voice. "When we set sail, we happened to take the same passenger ship. Although I observed you, I had no intention of contacting you. When you stayed in Byam, I had already taken Catlia's ship to this sea area. And when I returned, you again took Catlia's ship to come here." Klein was completely speechless, his breathing even stopped. Although it sounded absurd, it seemed like it really was just a coincidence. The other party's purpose for setting sail was to take Catlia's ship to the God War ruins, and the reason she chose to take the White Agate at first was to avoid attracting attention and to avoid conflict with the ruined kingdom's navy. And he had originally planned to ask the Hanged Man for help. Both the Star Admiral and the Iceberg Admiral were options he only encountered later. But in the end, he still chose the Star Admiral. So, wasn't this just a coincidence? At this moment, Klein even suspected that Ince Zangwill was nearby. How could there be such a coincidence? It must be Ince Zangwill's doing. Calm down. Klein calmed his mood, didn't continue this topic, and instead asked, "Are you Queen Mystic?" "Many people call me that," the lady opposite answered with a calm expression. Chapter 269, Dead Men Tell No Tales. "Really? This lady's bounty is as high as 650,000 pounds, in Loen alone." Klein inhaled silently. The moment he heard the other party call out Catlia's name directly, he already had a guess. Klein asked calmly, "Madam, what can I do for you?" Queen Mystic looked at him with her azure eyes for several seconds before saying, "You are very confident, but confidence is sometimes a flaw. You trust that copper whistle and paper crane too much. Perhaps one day, danger will come because of them." Klein's expression changed slightly. He had used the copper whistle on Bansi Island and had also used the paper crane multiple times during his journey to seek help from Snake of Fate Will Osepton. However, the number of times he used these two items was minimal. What he used most frequently was the 4 steps counterclockwise to enter the Fool. Since Queen Mystic could discover the copper whistle and paper crane, there was no reason she couldn't discover the ritual of him frequently going to the washroom and taking 4 steps counterclockwise. Of course, the other party might not know the true meaning of this ritual, she might only think he was communicating with some unknown existence. So, stay calm. Klein was slightly uneasy from her words, but he still didn't show it. Instead, he said coldly, "I don't understand what you mean. Confidence is sometimes a flaw." Queen Mystic repeated it patiently and said calmly, "Catlia was too confident in the sealed artifact she gave to Heath Doyle, and she didn't listen to me. She confidently believed she had enough understanding of this place and brought you back to the God War ruins. If I hadn't followed the ship, Nina would have died, Frank Lee would have died, she would have died, and only you might have survived." Heath Doyle. Klein's expression shifted slightly, keenly interpreting what Queen Mystic's words implied. The first mate of the future, Heath Doyle, is a Beyander of the secret supplicant pathway, and also a sequence 6 Rose Bishop. People of this pathway will almost certainly hear the voice of the true creator and become insane and lose control as a result. But Heath Doyle was an exception. He didn't go through the secret supplicant stage, but instead became a sequence 6 Rose Bishop directly due to an accident. At the same time, he also possessed a sealed artifact whose negative effect was that he could only hear sounds from very close sources. With double protection, this first mate, although a bit strange, was actually very safe. This information was actively revealed to Klein by Catlia, who even confidently told him, "No need to worry." However, Queen Mystic was clearly saying that the sealed artifact couldn't isolate the ravings that filled the entire sea area. But what kind of ravings could cause Heath Doyle to directly lose control? Klein blurted out, "True creator." Queen Mystic looked at him with a slight surprise and nodded gently. "Yes, it seems you know more secrets than I imagined." As expected, Klein's heart sank upon receiving the affirmative answer. He had previously guessed that the appearance of this God War ruins originated from the great battle between the 6 gods and the ancient sun god. Therefore, the various powers filling this sea area could all find their counterparts among the existing gods. Night belongs to Evernight Goddess, Sun belongs to Eternal Blazing Sun, Storm belongs to Lord of Storms, and Imagination belongs to Adam, the firstborn of God, and organizer of the Twilight Hermit Order. Of course, these residual powers have another explanation. That is the battle where the ancient sun god reclaimed the authorities of other ancient gods. In that case, these powers can also find their counterparts. Night belongs to Destruction Magic Wolf Flegre, Storm belongs to Elven King Suniasolam, Imagination belongs to Dragon King Anquelt, and Sun belongs to the ancient sun god himself. But now Queen Mystic says the ravings originate from the true creator, which directly supports the latter guess. Because the true creator and the ancient sun god have a successor relationship. The ancient sun god died in the siege of the 6 gods, and the true creator was born as a result. But this cannot explain another problem. If even the ancient sun god died in the siege of the 6 gods, how did the true creator, who only inherited a part of his power, survive the siege of the 6 gods? Klein didn't think the 6 gods didn't understand the principle of cutting the grass and eliminating the roots, nor did he think they would be kind enough to let the true creator go. And this further confirms his other guess. The ancient sun god was deliberately killed. Even the alliance of the 6 gods was summoned by him. His original plan might have been for the ancient sun god to be killed, and then for the resurrected true creator to inherit everything. However, some or all of the 6 gods betrayed him when they killed the ancient sun god. This resulted in the true creator only inheriting a part of the power, which is the secret supplicant pathway, while other pathways like Sun were divided among the remaining 6 gods. In this way, the previous doubts can be well explained. Why could the 6 gods kill the more powerful ancient sun god, but were helpless against the true creator? Because the ancient sun god was determined to die, while the true creator would fight back with all his might. Of course, perhaps not all 6 gods betrayed the ancient sun god. Because this betrayal was clearly not part of the plan, a portion of the 6 gods should have chosen not to interfere. Perhaps it was because they were unwilling to see the resurrection of the ancient sun god. After all, the overly powerful ancient sun god was undoubtedly a huge threat to them. But at the same time, they also did not want the true creator to be eliminated. Leaving the true creator could instead counterbalance the gods who betrayed the ancient sun god. As for who chose to betray and who chose to stand by and watch, it's actually not hard to guess. Klein thought of the murals little son saw when exploring the true creator's temple. The images of the 6 gods he saw in the Tudor ruins were somewhat uglyified in these murals. On the surface, the most severe uglyification was of Lord of Storms, Eternal Blazing Sun, and Earth Mother. But Ember said that the most severe uglyification was of Lord of Storms and Eternal Blazing Sun. Earth Mother and God of Knowledge and Wisdom were actually in the same tier as Evernight Goddess. Although he didn't know the reason for Ember's judgment, Klein could guess. For example, Lord of Storms and Eternal Blazing Sun, they might have followed the ancient sun god since their weak period and were able to possess strength comparable to King of Angels thanks to the ancient sun god's careful cultivation. They were once loyal servants of the ancient sun god, but precisely because of this, their betrayal would make the true creator even more furious. The predecessor of Earth Mother was Harvest Goddess, a subordinate god of the Giant King, and god of combat also appears to be a giant. This means they likely had to submit to the ancient sun god under pressure only after the death of Giant King Ormir. So their betrayal, while hateful, wasn't on the same level as that of Lord of Storms and Eternal Blazing Sun. Similarly, Evernight Goddess and God of Knowledge and Wisdom might be the same. The murals depicted different degrees of uglyification in their images based on the severity of their betrayal. From the surface, the least severe uglyification was of Evernight Goddess and God of Combat, followed by God of Knowledge and Wisdom. The former's uglyification was reflected in the strange eyes hidden in the surrounding environment, while God of Combat was almost completely normal. God of Knowledge and Wisdom's smile was just a bit strange, and the degree of uglyification was not as severe as Evernight Goddess. This should indicate that the goddess chose to stand by and watch in this betrayal, while God of Combat might have been causing trouble for the other four betraying gods. As for God of Knowledge and Wisdom, this was the most confusing for Klein. Did God of Knowledge and Wisdom also not participate in that betrayal? Although it was just a guess, Klein felt this was very likely the truth of the matter. Because he had some evidence. He once obtained a title when facing Eternal Blazing Sun directly, White Angel. This might be the honorary name of Eternal Blazing Sun when he was one of the ancient sun gods' 8 King of Angels. By extension, Lord of Storms is likely a member of the 8 King of Angels, and his honorary name might be Wind Angel. Thus, 6 of the 8 King of Angels are accounted for. Angel of Imagination Adam, Time Angel Aemon, Fate Angel Ouroboros, Red Angel Medici, White Angel Eternal Blazing Sun, Wind Angel Lord of Storms. So the question is, who are the remaining 2 King of Angels? A soft but emotionless voice suddenly came from beside his ear. Wisdom Angel, Harabergen, Dark Angel, Saucerer. Klein's expression changed slightly, and he said in a deep voice. You can probe my thoughts. Queen Mystic said softly. No, your thoughts are wrapped in a layer of hazy gray fog, which I cannot probe for now. Gray fog. Klein vaguely realized that the fool was playing a role, but his brows remained tightly furrowed. Then you, Queen Mystic said calmly. I could sense it because you called out their honorary names in the God War ruins. Not just me, they can also sense it. Klein's expression froze, suddenly realizing that this was the God War ruins, the former battlefield of the gods. Even if this wasn't the gods' backyard, it was at least their latrine. And he was chanting the names of those existences in the God War ruins, and even secretly speculating about their past betrayal. Wasn't this seeking death? No need to worry, Queen Mystic said softly. Under the protection of the Dark Moon, as long as you don't call out their true names, they won't sense everything that happens here. Dark Moon. Klein was startled for a moment, subconsciously looking upwards. The light of dusk shone through the stained glass high up, scattering onto the black stairs covered with reliefs. But through the transparent glass beside him, Klein did not see the expected dusk and sunset. Instead, a bright full moon hung high above. Its light was so bright, yet it didn't shed a single ray. Only the light of dusk fell upon the ground. The moment he looked directly at the full moon, Klein's expression changed again. Because he felt as if he was being watched by some existence again. Why did I say, again? Klein silently lowered his head, suddenly having a strong urge to commit suicide. It wasn't that he wanted to die so much, but mainly because, up to now, at least 4 true gods had set their sights on him, on the fool. Given this situation, would it be simpler for him to just kill himself? Under this half-mocking thought, Klein quickly adjusted his mindset. At least Queen Mystic in the Dark Moon, she mentioned, had no hostility towards him, otherwise she wouldn't have told him so much. So, instead of worrying so much, it's better to figure out the current situation. Klein took a deep breath and asked. You just said, Wisdom Angel, Harabergen. The former subordinate god of Dragon of Imagination Anquelt, Dragon of Wisdom, Harabergen. Queen Mystic nodded and said softly. Harabergen had already defected to the ancient sun god before the fall of the Dragon of Imagination. He was also the only non-human among the King of Angels, but was deeply trusted by the ancient sun god. Klein raised his eyebrows slightly. Adam and Amen were the descendants of the ancient sun god. And if the wisdom angel was the only non-human, that means the other 5 king of angels were once humans. In other words, the 5 of them were cultivated by the ancient sun god. Therefore, Red Angel and Fate Angel remained loyal to the true creator even after the death of the ancient sun god, remaining devoted even after death. And Wind Angel and White Angel betrayed the ancient sun god along with the wisdom angel, which is why the true creator wrote them down in his little book, holding a deep-seated hatred for them. Klein pondered for 2 seconds and asked, "How much more do you know about that ancient god war?" Queen Mystic shook her head gently. "Before this, I knew nothing about the truth of this god war. But from the information you have, the final betrayal might have also originated from Hariburgen." Klein's head ached. No wonder Queen Mystic was willing to answer his questions. Was it because she had already obtained enough information from him? It made sense. He didn't obtain so much information on his own, but through the Tarot Club. The murals little son discovered while exploring the true creator's temple, the statues he discovered while exploring the underground ruins, plus some details Ember learned from returning to the past. Combining these 3, he could make some guesses about the truth of this god war. And although Queen Mystic had lived for hundreds of years and had been investigating the hidden truths of history, the secrets she knew might not actually be as many as Klein's. For example, the records of the City of Silver and the history of the Sanguine are not easily known to outsiders. Klein frowned, confused. "You said the betrayal originated from Hariburgen." Queen Mystic hummed softly. "From the secrets I know, that seems to be the case." Klein's heart grew increasingly confused. If Hariburgen was the instigator, yet the depiction of God of knowledge and wisdom in the murals was not severely uglyified. What was going on? Klein murmured in a low voice. "Hariburgen is God of knowledge and wisdom, then." Queen Mystic suddenly spoke. "He is not." "What?" Queen Mystic said indifferently. "Hariburgen is not God of knowledge and wisdom, because he has already fallen." Chapter 270 Dream. Hariburgen has already fallen. Klein's mind was greatly shaken, and he was undoubtedly a little disbelieving. After all, according to Queen Mystic, this wisdom angel was once a subordinate god of the Dragon of Imagination, Ankwelt, and chose to pledge allegiance to the ancient sun god after the Dragon of Imagination fell. And since Hariburgen could gain the ancient sun god's trust and become one of the 8 king of angels as the only non-human, he must have had his outstanding qualities. Perhaps Hariburgen even contributed to the fall of the Dragon of Imagination. For example, he might have already pledged allegiance to the ancient sun god, and even told the ancient sun god some of the Dragon of Imagination's weaknesses, which led to the Dragon of Imagination's fall. If that were the case, then it would not be strange for Hariburgen, the Dragon of Wisdom, to gain the ancient sun god's trust, and becoming a wisdom angel as a non-human might have been a reward for his loyalty. It's just a pity that Hariburgen was clearly not truly loyal, and his betrayal at the last moment was the best proof. Moreover, he didn't just betray on his own, he also pulled the Wind Angel and the White Angel into betraying as well. Therefore, from a later perspective, the ancient sun god's trust in Hariburgen back then was no different from letting a wolf into the house. In that betrayal, the Wind Angel and the White Angel both gained huge benefits. The former became the Lord of Storms, while the latter became the eternal blazing sun, both of whom were true gods. Then, it was only natural for Hariburgen, the wisdom angel, who was the instigator of this betrayal, to become the god of knowledge and wisdom. However, now Queen Mystic tells him that not only did Hariburgen fail to become the god of knowledge and wisdom, but he had already fallen. Klein couldn't help but ask, "Do you have evidence for this?" Queen Mystic glanced at him and said calmly, "Why do you think we can call him by name without any punishment?" Klein immediately reacted, "That's right. If Hariburgen were the god of knowledge and wisdom, then his name itself would be a taboo. The moment they uttered this name, the other party would have sensed it." Klein had a deep understanding of this. For example, when he just divined a drop of blood from the eternal blazing sun, he was almost burned to ashes by him. Another example is when he just divined the origin of Ember, but accidentally provoked the Evernight goddess, causing the gray fog to be invaded by the Evernight goddess. If Hariburgen were a true god, there's no reason why he couldn't do what the eternal blazing sun and the Evernight goddess could. And the fact that they could talk about topics related to Hariburgen so freely, even calling him by name, without any reaction from him, already explained a lot. Although Queen Mystic said that with the protection of the Dark Moon, the gods would not detect what was happening here, the premise was that they couldn't call him by name. Klein was noncommittal about this, because he also didn't think that the Dark Moon that Queen Mystic mentioned could shield a true god's sensing of his true name. This was not a baseless guess, but a judgment Klein made based on his own experiences. What the gray fog couldn't do, there's no reason why some Dark Moon could. But even so, Haribergen's fall still made Klein feel incredible. The person who painstakingly schemed gained nothing, everything he did was for others, and he even lost his life in the process, becoming one of the only two losers. Well, the other loser was the ancient sun god. Calculating too much with cleverness, only to calculate away your own life. Klein's expression was a little strange. This wisdom angel, Haribergen, was quite tragic. But if Haribergen didn't become a god, then who is the current god of knowledge and wisdom? Also, who is that dark angel, Saussurier? Queen Mystic also called Saussurier by name directly. Does this mean that this king of angels has also fallen? If so, why did Saussurier fall? Klein's eyes moved slightly. He had a guess about the answer to the first question, but he didn't dare to think about it. Klein tentatively asked, "How much do you know about this dream?" He suspected that the dream world here was related to the Evernight goddess, but he had no evidence. Queen Mystic calmly said, "This dream world is not vast, it only has two parts, the projection of the Giant King's Court on the opposite mountain, and the Black Monastery here." Giant King's Court. A magnificent complex of buildings standing in the solidified dusk immediately appeared in Klein's mind. This turned out to be the projection of the Giant King's Court. Queen Mystic said in a gentle but emotionless tone, "This is my guess, because it is very similar to Fursak's Dusk Temple, and in the fourth epoch, there were always rumors that the god of combat was an ancient giant who survived before the Great Catastrophe. Not only is the god of combat, but also the Earth Mother." Klein thought silently. It seems that the intelligence Queen Mystic knows is indeed not as much as he imagined. The reason she answered every question was likely to show goodwill to the person behind me. "Haha, I am the only one behind me," Klein calmly replied. "The real Giant King's Court is in the forsaken land of the gods." He said this in a nonchalant tone to show his value and the status of the one behind him. Queen Mystic stopped in her tracks, her right palm resting on the armrest covered with beautiful sculptures, and turned halfway to look at Gehrman Sparrow, speaking neither quickly nor slowly. "Legend has it that the path to the forsaken land of the gods is hidden in the mountain opposite, hidden in the projection of the Giant King's Court." Queen Mystic continued to descend, then said, "The Black Monastery here doesn't look big, but each building and each floor of the house represents a different place in this sea area, and behind each door might be hidden the dream of a living being. There are also some residual dreams of some gods here," Klein said calmly, looking as if he had someone behind him and had already grasped a certain situation. Queen Mystic turned around, her azure eyes sweeping over Gehrman Sparrow's face. "This sea area, this Black Monastery, hides many secrets. I probably know less than 1%. She suddenly asked, "Do you have any other questions?" "No." Klein shook his head gently. In fact, he still had many questions, but he knew deeply that every answer came with a price. The more he asked, the greater the price he would have to pay. "Then it's your turn to answer my question now," Queen Mystic asked softly. "Can you understand Rosal's diary?" Klein was not surprised by this, and chuckled. "The one I believe in can." Queen Mystic looked at him with her azure eyes for several seconds before saying, "I hope you will share with me the method of deciphering the characters created by Rosal the Great. I can satisfy most of your requests." Klein neither admitted nor denied it, and instead asked, "Can you give me the corresponding high-sequence potion formulas?" Queen Mystic looked at him with restrained aura but undiminished demeanor and said, "Your destiny is on the main peak of the Honachus Mountains." This. Klein was inexplicably shocked. He turned his eyes slightly, pondered for a moment, and said, "I can help you pass on the message, but I cannot make any promises. When you need some help or clues to a few blasphemy cards, tell me the answer." Queen Mystic looked at him for a long time, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, just saying calmly. Klein's vision blurred, and a piece of parchment suddenly appeared on the table, with a string of honorific names recorded in Hermes. "Holy Spirit who pursues knowledge. Lighthouse of the mysterious world. Eye that peeks at destiny. King above the sea. Holy Bernadette Gustave. 5-segment. Klein raised an eyebrow. In the mysterious world, honorific names have great meaning. And their most important significance is that they can accurately point to oneself. And the stronger one's strength, the shorter the honorific name needed when praying. Therefore, although the honorific names of gods are very long, usually only 3 segments are needed. In contrast, the honorific names of angels and demigods are much longer. The former is usually 4 segments, and the latter is usually 5 segments, not 1 segment less. And in order to accurately point to themselves, the last segment of the honorific name is usually their true name. For example, the sea god Cavatua, who is possessed by Klein, has the honorific name Benefactor of the Sea and the Spirit World, Protector of the Rorstad Archipelago, Dominator of Underwater Creatures, Controller of Tsunamis and Storms, Great Cavatua. And since Queen Mystic also used a 5-segment honorific name, does this mean that she is also just a demigod? Or perhaps, she has actually become a Sequence 2 angel, but deliberately did not change her honorific name to mislead her enemies? Bernadette didn't give him an answer, because she had already left Backland, Empress Borough, in Earl Hall's family's luxurious villa. Audrey had just tried on the 3 evening gowns she had chosen for the day, and was sitting on a cushioned chair, thinking about what accessories should be paired with each of them, which option she preferred, and what her mother's opinion would be. There was a royal banquet tonight, and Earl Hall had received an invitation, which she would also attend. In fact, banquets were rarely held in Backland during this time of year, because only during the social season, which is from June to the New Year, the nobles of the ruined kingdom would traditionally come to Backland to attend various banquets, balls, and salons. This was a very important activity for them, and many things would be finalized during these few months. After the New Year, the landed nobles would successively return to their fiefs, to their own luxurious mansions and ancient castles, country estates, and large plantations, to spend their leisurely and beautiful time. And now it was February, and most of the nobles had already returned to their fiefs. Only a small number of nobles, like Earl Hall, who had busy official duties and were unable to get away, remained in Backland. Audrey could foresee that there would not be many nobles attending the banquet tonight, and it would not be as lively as the New Year's ball. Of course, although the number of nobles who had the opportunity to attend the banquet was small, their status was much higher than those who had returned to their fiefs. Most of them were high-ranking government officials, who were unable to enjoy a leisurely and beautiful time because they were busy formulating and implementing various government policies, but this often also meant that they had more real power than those nobles who enjoyed leisure. Many decisions that truly affected the national level were also often made during this period. And for the Hall family, this half-year was undoubtedly their ascension period. They had to seize every opportunity to solidify the foundation of the Hall family within these 6 months and strive for more benefits. Just as she was thinking, the young lady suddenly noticed an extra figure in the mirror. She subconsciously turned her head, and the lady in the black dress was already lying lazily on her soft bed. Audrey asked with some surprise, "Karula, when did you come back?" Karula waved her hand and said lazily, "Just now, didn't you see? Why do you ask again?" Audrey was unmoved. This was consistent with her impression of Karula, and even the expected answer was very similar. Audrey pondered for 2 seconds and said, "There's something I want to discuss with you." "What?" "My family has some low sequence beyonders. Can I tell them your honorific name so they can also enter the dream world?" Karula's lips curled up slightly, and she smiled. "Of course you can. You don't need to ask me about this in the future. It doesn't matter who you tell." Audrey asked with some confusion, "Aren't you worried that there will be too many people?" Karula said meaningfully, "Too many? I'd only think it's too few. The more people who entered the dream, the more people who borrowed the power of fire, and the more people who knew that piece of history, the more beneficial it would be for the things she wanted to do." She wished that all Beyonders would enter the dream world. Whoosh! Klein exhaled silently. The God War ruins was too dangerous. If he didn't sleep at night, he would disappear, and even when he slept, he had to worry about encountering misfortune in the dream. And during the day, all sorts of monsters and demons would appear, making him extremely annoyed. He was about to lie down and rest for a while when he suddenly heard light footsteps approaching. Knock, 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 his door was knocked. "Who?" Klein sat up. "Me." Katlia's voice came through. Klein approached with some doubt and opened the door. He didn't ask what was wrong, just looked at the other party indifferently, his gaze explaining everything. Katlia pushed up the heavy glasses on the bridge of her nose and said, "Coming out of that sea area doesn't bring you back to where you entered. It's less than 100 nautical miles from Toscat Island, and it will take about 3 days to get to Nas. Where do you want to go back to? Entering or leaving isn't in the same place." Klein was slightly startled and asked confirmingly, "Can you enter that sea area from here?" "No, you will fall directly into the bottomless crevice that cuts off the ocean. According to the divination results, those who do this are truly dead." Katlia explained briefly. "So that's how it is." Klein thought for a moment and said, "Go to Toscat Island." The reason he didn't choose Nas was that it was already very close to the time to convene the next tarot gathering, and he didn't want to do this time-consuming task on the future. "Okay." Katlia had no objections. Watching her turn around and walk towards the captain's cabin, Klein narrowed his eyes slightly. It seemed that she didn't know that Queen Mystic had already boarded the ship. Chapter 271, So You Are This Kind of Bernadette. On both sides of the mottled and ancient bronze long table, blurry figures stretched and elongated within the embrace of deep red light before settling down. The surroundings were as quiet and empty as ever, seemingly untouched by living beings for millions of years. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Miss Justice Audrey's light and pleasant voice quickly echoed within the magnificent palace supported by stone pillars. Her gaze quickly spotted an extra figure across from her, her eyes slightly brightening as she smiled faintly. "Welcome back, lover." Klein nodded with a smile, watching the members simply greet each other under the lead of Miss Justice. "Lover." The hermit Katlia had originally kept her head down in silence, not even noticing that the Tarot Club had gained an extra person. It wasn't until she heard Miss Justice greeting lover that she looked up in surprise, examining the newly appeared member. She had been a member of the Tarot Club for some time and had previously heard other members of the Tarot Club discussing lover, but this was the first time she had seen him. The hermit Katlia suppressed her unease, slightly raising her head and subtly observing lover under the thick gray fog. Her dark eyes held a deep purple hidden within, revealing a mysterious meaning. They saw through the layer of gray fog and saw the flame. Suddenly, Katlia's eyes felt hot, and illusory blood flowed out. Her senses were instantly overwhelmed by extreme pain, as if she were being scorched by endless flames. Her body twitched and trembled uncontrollably, causing her to fall off the long chair and curl up into a ball of agony. Cracks revealing flesh and blood quickly appeared on her face, the backs of her hands, and any areas not covered by clothing. Inside, black worms and white moths writhed, about to form countless indescribable eyes. Katlia's screams and groans echoed above the gray fog, causing Miss Justice Audrey, Hanged Man Alger, the Moon Emlyn, Magician Furs, and others to look at each other, seemingly experiencing the pain she was enduring firsthand. At the same time, the blurry image became clearer. The gray fog around Katlia seemed to be dispersed by something invisible, allowing them to clearly see the hermit's physical mutation. That disgusting and horrifying sight scared Miss Justice Audrey, causing her to instantly avert her gaze, straighten her back, look straight ahead, and dare not move. Although the reactions of the others weren't as exaggerated, they held the same meaning. "This is bad." Klein's expression changed slightly, and he lightly stroked his palms. The gray fog silently filled the void left by the dispersal, enveloping the hermit once again and calming the mutation on her body. The hermit's trembling began to subside at a visible speed. The flesh and blood cracks on her body gradually closed, her thoughts slowly returned, and she once again felt everything around her. Klein quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, nothing serious happened. Otherwise, if the hermit were to die above the gray fog, the other members would definitely harbor resentment towards the Tarot Club. "What is going on?" The Moon Emlyn was full of surprise, completely unable to understand what had happened. From his perspective, the hermit had simply glanced at lover and suddenly started screaming in pain, as if enduring immense torment, her body uncontrollably curling up into a ball. If Mr. Fool hadn't intervened in time, the other party would likely have died on the spot. And it wasn't just the moon, the others were equally bewildered, not knowing why things had turned out this way. At this moment, the hermit Katlia finally recovered, struggling to crawl back to her seat. However, this time she didn't dare to open her eyes again. With her eyes tightly shut, she panted and explained, "My eyes of mystery are instinctive, they can only be strengthened, not closed. I have to rely on mystical items to seal them. And there are none here." Klein nodded gently and said, "You can manifest a pair of glasses." "Yes, Mr. Fool." Katlia manifested the glasses as instructed. During this process, Klein slightly leveraged the power above the gray fog and integrated it into the glasses. When Katlia put them on, she unsurprisingly found that her eyes of mystery had been sealed. Only then did the others understand why Hermit Ms. had suddenly suffered such severe harm. It was because her eyes of mystery allowed her to see many essences that others could not. But the question was, what did she see that caused such a severe backlash? The Hanged Man seemed to realize something. He had cooperated with Lover before. So he knew very well that Lover's strength must be above Sequence 4, at least a Sequence 3 demigod. And judging from the Hermit's reaction, Lover was likely at least a Sequence 2 angel. After all, if he were just a demigod, merely looking at him wouldn't cause the Hermit to nearly lose control. Moreover, this is above the gray fog, it is Mr. Fool's divine kingdom. Only an angel could have an essence that even a true god couldn't completely conceal. An angel. The Hanged Man's mood suddenly became a mix of pleasant surprise and excitement. Even though this angel wasn't him, just the fact that the other party was a member of the Tarot Club was enough to make the Hanged Man ecstatic. One must know that even within the Storm Church, and even among the major Orthodox churches, only the Triple Crowned are at this level. An angel is an existence capable of being on equal footing with these Triple Crowned. And he could be in the same organization as an angel, even working alongside him and having cooperated with him. Didn't this mean he was on equal footing with an angel? To put it another way, didn't this mean he was on equal footing with the Triple Crown of the major Orthodox churches? Not an earl, not a marquis, but a duke. The Moon Emlyn also guessed that Lover might be an angel, finding it somewhat unbelievable, and his mood inexplicably became more reserved. He had previously only thought Lover was a powerful demigod. Although he felt awe, he didn't think it was that remarkable. After all, the Sanguine were not short of demigods. There were over a dozen Sanguine at the Earl and Marquis level just among those he knew. But angels were different. Even among the Sanguine, there were only 3 dukes. And the reason they had 3 was due to the accumulation of the Sanguine over thousands of years. It was no exaggeration to say that most Orthodox churches might not even have as many angels as the Sanguine. And now, an angel was sitting right beside him. The Moon's breathing became rapid, and his mood suddenly became somewhat excited. In reality, Duke Olmer personally looked after him. And even when he was sleeping, he could enter the dream of another angel, gaining the opportunity to digest potions and challenge himself. Now, in the Tarot Club, there was also an angel as his colleague. 3 great angels serving me alone, how could this blessing be small? I am indeed the chosen one. The Moon's mood became extremely pleasant, and he increasingly believed that he was Theshavir, foretold in the ancestors' prophecy. Compared to them, the Sun's gaze was somewhat complex. He hesitated several times, seemingly knowing that it wasn't his time to speak. As for Justice, Judgment, and Magician, they appeared more composed. The former was because of her closer relationship with Ember. She even knew exactly how George III, who was a king of angels, died, so there was naturally nothing to be surprised about. The latter two, due to their respective experiences, held the greatest trust in Ember. Therefore, no matter what strength he possessed, they wouldn't find it exaggerated, only thinking, as expected. Quote. Even though her eyes of mystery had been sealed, the hermit Catlia still didn't dare to look up. She only subtly observed Lover across from her with her peripheral vision. The other party looked quite ordinary, just a figure whose face was hidden by the gray fog, unremarkable in both height and build. Catlia couldn't even find any characteristics on him. And this was unique, even within the Tarot Club. Miss Justice is a noble lady, Miss Judgment is a short knight, Miss Magician has a lazy demeanor, the Sun is a sunny and serious young man, the Moon is proud but not arrogant, the Hanged Man appears rough but is actually deep and calculating, Mr. Fool is mysterious and powerful. Every person has their own unique characteristics and personality, visible with just a glance. But Lover was different, he looked utterly unremarkable. If the hermit were to summarize him, she could only conclude, ordinary person. Yet, such an unremarkable, ordinary person caused the hermit to show fear. She saw his essence, saw the flame that was madly devouring the surrounding gray fog, constantly expanding outwards, sweeping across the entire area above the gray fog. She definitely didn't see wrong. This Lover is step by step devouring the divine kingdom belonging to Mr. Fool. This made the hermit feel fear. She feared the truth she had learned, and she feared her current situation. She was afraid of being silenced because she had seen all of this. So she was still hesitating, wondering whether to tell Mr. Fool everything she had seen. Mr. Fool seemed to see through her inner struggle and suddenly asked with a smile, "What did you see?" Upon hearing this, the gazes of Justice and the others all turned towards the hermit, because they also wanted to ask this question and know the answer. But since it involved Mr. Fool and Lover, they found it hard to speak. But now that Mr. Fool himself had asked, they had no need to hide their curiosity. The hermit Catlia's lips trembled a few times, her voice slightly shaking. "Mr. Fool, I saw flame expanding outwards." Flame. Klein showed understanding. First fire is Ember's essence. As for expanding, is it because first fire is constantly growing stronger? Or is the flame devouring the gray fog? Is she hinting at me? Klein couldn't help but laugh. Miss Hermit was quite kind. However, this was already within his expectations. The King's soul has already integrated into the area above the gray fog, and the flame's expansion will be a continuous process, until the entire area above the gray fog is transformed into the shape of the King's soul. From the hermit's perspective, she likely believed that as soon as Lover returned, he couldn't wait to secretly infiltrate Mr. Fool's divine kingdom. This kind of behavior could almost be called wolfish ambition. But unfortunately, Klein didn't care. He could only be considered half the master of Saphira Castle. The celestial worthy was the true master, and was even thinking of possessing him. Klein's current mindset seemed a bit like selling his grandfather's land without feeling the pinch, but he wasn't Thiessen, nor was the celestial worthy Klein's grandfather, he was his greatest enemy. Klein couldn't wait for the king's soul to devour Saphira Castle sooner, preferably causing the celestial worthy, who was hidden deep within Saphira Castle and constantly thinking of possessing him, to completely vanish into thin air. Flame. Justice Audrey seemed to realize something. Karula had said that she possessed a portion of the king's soul, which Ember had given her. Besides the portion she held, there were 8 other portions in the hands of others. Without exception, these king's souls were all voluntarily distributed by Ember, although the purpose is unknown. But combining Karula's attitude with what she had seen in her dreams, Audrey had already pieced together part of the truth. Ember once threw himself into transferring fire without regard for his own safety, until he himself became the fire. And now, perhaps resisting this fate, he divided the king's soul into 9 portions. Ember stared at the hermit for a long time before suddenly speaking, "Your eyes are somewhat special." The hermit trembled slightly. Although the other party looked utterly unremarkable, she felt as if she saw a ball of flame about to devour everything. The pain of her body being scorched by the flame was still vivid in her memory. Even though the injuries had been calmed by Mr. Fool, her body still faintly ached. Special. Klein found it a bit strange. Eyes of Mystery clearly belonged to the Mystery Prior pathway, perhaps a Beander ability possessed by Sequence 5. But no matter what, the hermit was only Sequence 5, which couldn't be called special. Klein's expression shifted slightly, and he suddenly noticed something strange. If she was only Sequence 5, how did she see through all of this? This is above the gray fog. It's Saphira Castle, which even gods cannot easily invade. How could a Sequence 5 see Ember's essence through the gray fog? This is definitely not something a Sequence 5 can do. Is someone helping her from behind? Or did she borrow someone's power? Klein immediately thought of Queen Mystic. Was it her? The hermit's loss of control was undoubtedly an exception. Her eyes were clearly aimed at him, but the first thing she saw was Ember. This made Klein inexplicably wary. If the hermit hadn't seen Ember first just now, he, being completely unguarded below the gray fog, would likely have been exposed because of it. But wasn't Queen Mystic afraid that this would cause the hermit to provoke Mr. Fool? Testing the might of a god, wasn't she afraid that Katlia would be killed because of it? Klein frowned tightly. Was Queen Mystic this kind of person? After a moment of thought, Mr. Fool tapped the table with his finger, attracting the attention of the others, and said faintly, "Bernadette." Chapter 272. Then you find the property management. Bernadette. Hearing this familiar name, Miss Justice Audrey's eyes showed a hint of surprise. Although Bernadette is a common Intis female name, when she went to Intis before, she met a lady named Bernadette among the nobles. But since this name came from Mr. Fool, it means she must be a Beander from the mysterious world, and a very powerful one. And Audrey only knew one such Beander. That was Bernadette Gustave, the angel who saved hundreds of thousands of people during the Backland Great Smog incident. This was not just an adjective, but also a fact. Bernadette Gustave was a genuine Sequence 2 angel. Combining the conversation between Mr. Fool and Lover, was this saying that Bernadette had tampered with the hermit's eyes, allowing her to see through their essence above the gray fog. This is too much. Audrey almost forgot her image and etiquette training and puffed out her cheeks. She realized for the first time that not all Tarot Club members had such a sense of belonging, or worshipped and trusted Mr. Fool as much as she did. Meanwhile, Hangman and the others also had similar questions and guesses in their hearts, although their points of concern were different. However, they all tacitly chose to be spectators. Son, Derek didn't think too much, just vaguely felt that the atmosphere was a bit off, so he asked, half out of curiosity and half out of confusion. "Mr. Fool, who is Bernadette?" Klein secretly praised and answered casually. "Rosal's eldest daughter. The owner of the Dawn. The leader of Oravi Island." He listed Bernadette's identities one by one, leaving her with no secrets before the Tarot Club members. "The owner of the Dawn. Queen Mystic. She's actually Rosal the Great's eldest daughter." Alger had previously introduced the 4 kings and 7 admirals above the gray fog, so the other Tarot Club members quickly connected everything. While surprised, they also found it a bit hard to believe. Even if you are one of the 4 kings, you are at most a Sequence 3 demigod. How dare you probe a true god? The hermit's breathing became a little rapid, her beautiful eyes filled with disbelief. Her first reaction was Mr. Fool trying to sow discord between her and Bernadette? But she quickly ruled out this possibility, because if her eyes hadn't been tampered with, how could she, a mere Sequence 5, see through Lover's essence? This wasn't her first time participating in the Tarot Club, nor was it her first time facing Mr. Fool and the others directly. There was no reason she couldn't see through them all those times before, but suddenly could see through others' essence through the gray fog now. It could only be that her eyes had been tampered with. But she herself didn't know her eyes had been tampered with. Who could have done such a thing? So everyone suspected Bernadette, and even Mr. Fool personally pointed out Bernadette's name. This matter was set in stone. But Catlia's heart was still struggling. She absolutely refused to believe that Bernadette would do such a thing to her. Her heart was incredibly tormented, struggling and despairing. Struggling to not believe the truth, and despairingly fearing that it was the truth. Mr. Fool Klein's gaze fell upon the hermit Catlia, and he chuckled lightly, seemingly unconcerned. You can tell Bernadette that if she wants to know the answer, she must pay a corresponding price. The hermit Catlia's lips moved, but she couldn't make any sound, as if suffering from aphonia. Catlia's mood grew heavier, and an intense sense of fear uncontrollably arose. For a moment, she didn't know what attitude or words to use in response. In her opinion, the true meaning of Mr. Fool's words just now was convey this sentence, but only this one sentence. She couldn't say anything extra, not even give any hints. Catlia believed she understood what the implied meaning was. The first time was a warning, but there would only be one time. If she made the mistake again, there would definitely be no good outcome. Because Mr. Fool had already made it very clear. If you want to know the answer, you must pay the price. It was precisely because she attempted to pry into a god that she suffered immense pain and torment. The pain just now was even countless times stronger than the torment caused by hidden sage instilling knowledge in her. Painful memories flooded her mind, causing the hermit Catlia's body to tremble slightly. She stammered, I shall remember your grace's clemency. Mr. Fool Klein within the grey fog nodded lightly, no longer repeating his previous words. The hermit's warning just now was clearly an attempt to use the fact that Lover attempted to disadvantage Mr. Fool to cover up her disrespectful act of prying into a god. If he hadn't known about this, it could indeed be considered making up for her mistake. But not only was he fully aware of it, he even relished it. However, looking at it this way, wasn't the hermit trying to sow discord? But even if she was, it was useless. After all, Ember was his dearest friend and closest brother. While complaining inwardly, Klein manipulated Mr. World, making him look around and laugh softly. Does anyone have the potion formula for the Seer Pathway Sequence 4, or a clue? Although Mr. World's alias had been exposed in front of Ember, this made Klein, who was performing puppet show openly, feel a bit subtle. But as the saying goes, as long as he wasn't awkward, the awkward one was someone else. Furthermore, the others hadn't seen through the fact that Mr. World was his alias, right? What's more, in the face of absolute gain, what did the risk of exposure matter? Sequence 4. Mr. World is going to step into the demigod level. Miss Justice Audrey was a little surprised. But thinking about it carefully, it wasn't strange. After all, Mr. World was the first person to defeat Gouda, and his potion was digested as a result. Advancing to Sequence 5 was a natural progression. And the digestion of the Sequence 5 potion could also be achieved through the dream world. What was missing now was only the Sequence 4 potion formula. As expected of Mr. Fool's favored one. Hanged Man Alger sighed with emotion. He had been challenging Gouda during this time, but each time ended in failure. This also made him realize that Mr. World's seemingly effortless battle was not easy at all. Because even if he challenged Gouda strictly following Mr. World's fighting style, he still found it difficult to even reach the second phase. Sun, Derek, Magician Furs, and Judgment Zio all shook their heads, indicating that they hadn't heard what Sequence 4 of this pathway was called. The Moon Emlyn considered for a few seconds before speaking. I can help you ask Duke Olmer, but I can't guarantee there will be clues in this regard. Although he was extremely proud and confident in the Sanguine's long history, he didn't dare to make any easy promises. In fact, Klein didn't really expect to get the answer from them. After all, most of them were only Sequence 6, and didn't even have the potion formula for Sequence 5 of their own pathway, let alone Sequence 4 of other pathways. In Klein's eyes, there were only a few people in the entire Tarot Club who were potentially able to possess a Sequence 4 potion formula. One was Miss Magician, who had the potion formula for the Apprentice Pathway Sequence 4 in her hands. The other was Miss Justice, who had the potion formula for the Spectator Pathway Sequence 4 in her hands. Besides these two, the only others who might have a chance to obtain a potion formula of this level were Ember and the Hermit. But Klein still didn't have much hope for the Hermit. The only one he placed high hopes on was Ember. Or rather, the Church of the Night. Queen Mystic Bernadette said his fate was at the main peak of the Honachus Mountains. Snake of Fate Will Osepton also said that if he wanted high sequence formulas for the Seer Pathway, he could only find the Mad Zeratwal or go to the Honachus Mountains, unless he was a member of the Evernight. Of course, Klein was not a member of the Evernight, but Ember was. Although he hadn't fully figured out the relationship between Ember and the Church of the Night, or rather, the Evernight Goddess, it was definitely unusual. If his guess was correct, they were allies. Since he was Ember's ally, and Ember was also his ally. Rounding up, he was an ally of the Church of the Night. So, there's nothing wrong with him asking the Church of the Night for help now, right? Ember pondered for 2 seconds before speaking. I can help you ask. Good. Mr. World nodded lightly, not surprised by this answer. After a few seconds of silence, the hermit Catlia spoke. I need a drop of a mythical creature's blood, any mythical creature. Inside the palace supported by stone pillars, silence suddenly became the main theme. Even Mr. World wasn't entirely clear on the precise definition of a mythical creature. For example, the true creator's child inside Megos's belly that he had faced was a mythical creature. For example, he knew that demigods possessed divinity and were equivalent to mythical creatures. But what the specific concept of a mythical creature was, he wasn't very clear. Klein didn't expose this point, planning to ask someone he could consult later. He manipulated Mr. World and said after a few seconds of silence, I will keep an eye out. Given that this was a rare request from Miss Hermit, Justice and the others also gave similar responses. Okay. The hermit Catlia wasn't surprised by the outcome. Her only purpose in making the request was to show Mr. Fool her attitude of integrating into the Tarot Club. She believed this was more conducive to dispelling the aftermath of the previous incident than trembling and being fearful. And the facts were as she expected. Mr. Fool did not treat her unfairly because of what happened just now. The other members of the Tarot Club also didn't dwell on it too much, and their attitude towards her was still friendly. This meant that she still had a chance to gain a foothold in the Tarot Club, provided she didn't make the same mistake again. The hermit Catlia took a deep breath, feeling quite fortunate for such a result. Being accepted was already the best reward. As for the transaction itself, she didn't have much hope. Because she believed that such high-level items wouldn't appear in the Tarot Club for the time being, unless Mr. Fool was willing to provide help. Of course, that Mr. Lover might also be able to. But these two were unlikely to help her with this. After all, her actions just now were an offense to them. Ember pondered for 2 seconds, then suddenly asked, what is a mythical creature? Miss Justice Audrey looked at Catlia curiously, she also wanted to know the answer. Hanged Man also pricked up his ears, he was quite interested in this information as well. Quote. The hermit Catlia was stunned for a long while, seemingly not having reacted. Because in her mind, beings like Mr. Fool and Mr. Lover didn't need others to explain what a mythical creature was. But now Lover suddenly asked, did he not know? No, impossible. Such beings could not possibly not know what a mythical creature was. So why did he ask this? Is he trying to help me out of a difficult situation? The hermit Catlia suddenly thought of a possibility and was convinced by it. Due to her previous rudeness, although others wouldn't say anything out of respect for Mr. Fool, they must have had some reservations in their hearts. In this situation, merely proposing a transaction was far from enough. She needed to show more value. And the information that others hadn't grasped was one of them. Yes, it must be like this. The hermit Catlia felt a little grateful. She organized her thoughts and explained. Simply put, from gaining divinity and advancing to sequence 4, it is a gradual process of evolving towards a mythical creature. This process doesn't end until sequence 2, which is why angels and saints have fundamental differences. In ancient times, the former could even be called minor gods. Every demigod, including saints and angels, has their mythical creature form. This is a non-human form that combines complex knowledge, divine characteristics, and hidden symbols. Ordinary people, even just glancing at it, will suffer severe harm, or even go insane. And the higher the beyonder characteristics of the demigod, the stronger and more irresistible such damage is. Therefore, creatures at this level must constantly control themselves and not reveal their corresponding forms, otherwise their mere existence will bring disaster to the surroundings. For demigods, a major characteristic of losing control is losing rationality and being unable to restrain their mythical creature form anymore. However, a saint's mythical creature form is incomplete and still has obvious characteristics of their original race. Strictly speaking, one must reach sequence 2 to be considered a true mythical creature. After a pause, Catlia explained. What I need is the pure blood of a mythical creature, which means the blood of an angel. 1 drop is enough. If it were demigod blood, she could get it herself, but that would be meaningless. And it is precisely because of such harsh conditions that wild beyonders of the mystery prior pathway find it more difficult to advance to sequence 4 than any other pathway. Unless they have the help of an angel elder. But if they had such an elder, they wouldn't be considered wild beyonders. Ember asked in confusion. If that's the case, why don't you ask Bernadette? What? Catalia didn't react for a moment. Chapter 273, Secret. Hermit. Catalia didn't react for a moment, and the others were also a little confused. Look for Bernadette. Why look for Bernadette? Could it be because the lover thinks Queen Mystic can get angel's blood? Queen Mystic is one of the 4 kings, at least a demigod. But even she would find it difficult to establish contact with an angel. And the hermit might not have sought help from Queen Mystic, but Queen Mystic couldn't provide help either, which is why she sought a transaction at the Tarot Club. The hanged man's eyes flickered, having likely pieced together the truth of the matter. But on this matter, Justice Audrey actually had a more accurate answer. That is, Queen Mystic is already an angel, and with the relationship between the hermit and her, a drop of blood is not difficult. But the hermit didn't do this, indicating that she likely doesn't know that Queen Mystic is already an angel. And that was indeed the case. The hermit's understanding was still that Queen Mystic was a Sequence 3 saint, seeking a way to become an angel. But Ember's question made her keenly aware of this possibility and heard Ember's hint. She shouldn't seek help at the Tarot Club, but should go find Queen Mystic. Hermit. Catalia remained silent. She didn't understand the reason why Mr. Lover did this. Was he telling her that her master was Bernadette and not the Tarot Club? So when she had a need, she should go back and find her master. But if that was the case, then why did he ask her to explain the definition of a mythical creature? Wasn't it so that she could better integrate into the Tarot Club? Surely he didn't just ask because he simply didn't understand the definition of a mythical creature, right? Then were his subsequent questions also just simple kind suggestions? Impossible. Although he didn't know who Mr. Lover was, he was definitely in existence on the same level as the fool. And how could such an existence not know what a mythical creature was? The hermit didn't know how to answer, so she humbly said, "Thank you for your suggestion. I will go ask." Ember nodded lightly, not paying too much attention. Although the actions of hermit Ms. were quite offensive in the eyes of others, Ember didn't actually care. Because he didn't mind someone taking the initiative to come to his door to transferring fire. This was a good thing. In his hands, the characteristic of the first fire was extremely gentle, and looking at it would not cause serious harm. But unfortunately, the hermit's luck was not very good. The king's soul was competing with Saphira Castle itself for the ownership of Saphira Castle. This was a life and death secret war. At this time, even the first fire with a gentle characteristic would show extremely strong aggressiveness. And the hermit just happened to look directly at the flame at this time, which is why she suffered immense torment and pain. Fortunately, as half the master of Saphira Castle, the fool had some control over Saphira Castle, allowing him to temporarily seal the hermit's Beander abilities. Seeing that the matter had come to an end, son, Derek couldn't wait to speak. Everyone, I hope to obtain the potion formula for the son, Derek, pathway sequence 6 feet notary. Just as Ember was about to speak, Mr. World quickly answered in a hoarse voice. I can provide the potion formulas and Beander characteristics for sequence 6 feet notary, and sequence 5 feet priest of light. Give me 2 days. Within the creeping hunger, a priest of light's soul was still bound. As long as it was released, the potion formulas for the sun, pathway sequence 6 and sequence 5 could be obtained. It was precisely because of this convenience that Klein chose to answer quickly. He couldn't earn other people's money, but couldn't he earn Little Sun's? Okay, Mr. World. Son, Derek responded happily. He had basically finished digesting his Solar High Priest potion, and advancing to sequence 6 was a sure thing. He originally thought that since the lover had returned, he could obtain the potion formula from him. As for the materials, he could collect them slowly. And now that Mr. World could provide both the potion formula and the Beander characteristics, that was naturally the best. And not only sequence 6, but even sequence 5 was already prepared. Although he had to pay a certain price, this was much easier than him collecting them slowly by himself. The moon, Emlyn looked at Little Sun with some envy, not expecting much, but still couldn't help but ask. I need the lingering characteristic of a sanguine viscount. Do you have any clues? Although he hadn't finished digesting his potion yet, and he didn't have enough money to buy the lingering characteristic of a viscount, it wouldn't hurt him to ask a couple of questions anyway. Ember glanced at the moon, Emlyn, and said, I have a sanguine viscount's Beander characteristic. Ah, the moon, Emlyn was stunned for a moment, then his heart was filled with ecstasy. There really was one. The moon couldn't help but ask, what price do I need to pay? A Sequence 5 Sanguine Viscount Beander characteristic was worth about £8,000. The Moon, Emlyn certainly didn't have that much money. The previous Baron's Beander characteristic almost bankrupted him, and £8,000 was something he didn't even dare to imagine. But this didn't mean that Emlyn couldn't raise £8,000. For example, he could completely borrow money from Miss Justice. Of course, this was just a backup plan. In Emlyn's heart, the best way was to ask Duke Olmer for help. As long as he could defeat Gouda first, he could not only completely digest the potion, but also make Duke Olmer look at him in a new light. Although due to the solidification of the sanguine internal hierarchy, there were no extra Beander characteristics. So even a duke couldn't easily provide him with a Sequence 5 Beander characteristic, but the other party certainly wouldn't mind giving him some material rewards in the form of gold pounds. Ember pondered for 2 seconds and said, "I need you to answer a few questions for me." "No problem," Emlyn said without hesitation. "Let alone a few questions, dozens would be fine." Ember thought for a moment and asked, "How many angels do the Sanguine have now?" Emlyn thought for a moment. Queen of the Blood Moon Ornia, who just recently woke up, and the 3 great dukes who have been in charge of the Sanguine for thousands of years, 1 Sequence 1, 3 Sequence 2, a total of 4. Ember asked with some surprise. 3. Who are these 3 dukes respectively? Emlyn didn't hesitate and answered directly. Duke Olmer, Duke Elena, and Duke Alyssa. After a pause, Emlyn continued. It is rumored that the 3 great dukes are all from the same family, and Duke Alyssa is the former goddess of life. The expressions of the Tarot Club members were all a bit subtle. Elena and Alyssa, these 2 names were undoubtedly female. In other words, among the 4 angels, only Duke Olmer was male. The other 3, including the blood ancestor Lilith, were all female. Could this be considered an imbalance of yin and yang in the Sanguine? Magician, Furs muttered in her heart. The Sanguine and the Church of the Night, the Earth Mother Church should have a lot of common ground. Ember pressed on. Do you know the name of which family? The Moon, Emlyn thought for a while, not very sure, and said. Should it be Todd Bringer? Perhaps afraid that the lover would misunderstand that he wasn't serious enough, Emlyn added. This past event is not heavily recorded in the history of the Sanguine, and the 3 great dukes have all abandoned their original surnames. Even those elderly Sanguine may not be clear. Ember nodded thoughtfully and suddenly asked, what is the relationship between the Sanguine and the Earth Mother Church? Ah, the Moon, Emlyn was stunned for a long time and said with a somewhat complicated expression. What kind of relationship are you referring to? The relationship between the Sanguine and the 7 Orthodox gods' churches is quite harmonious. Although there have been frictions in history, they are generally peaceful. As for the relationship between the Sanguine and the Earth Mother Church, I feel it's no different from other Orthodox churches. The hanged man calmly watched Emlyn, neither agreeing nor disagreeing with these words. At least the 7 Orthodox gods' churches did not list the Sanguine as extraordinary creatures, nor did they organize large-scale purges of the Sanguine. Speaking of which, among the 8 extraordinary races that once ruled the world, it seems that only the Sanguine still exist today. Other extraordinary races, even those that were once as powerful as dragons and giants, have completely disappeared, only described in scattered words in history. Of course, this may also be because the Sanguine are special enough. On the one hand, the appearance of the Sanguine is no different from that of humans, and they can hide well among humans without being discovered. On the other hand, the blood ancestor Lilith was one of the earliest ancient gods to fall. This also allowed the Sanguine, an extraordinary race, to be the first to put down the pride of extraordinary races and begin to live mixed with humans. To this day, there are even many high-ranking government officials among the 4 kingdoms of the North Continent who are Sanguine, showing their status. But why did the lover specifically mention the Earth Mother Church? Klein also fell into thought. He knew that Emlyn volunteered at the Harvest Church that worshipped the Earth Mother, but this certainly had no direct connection to Ember's question. After all, Ember didn't know the Moon's identity in reality, and even if he did, there was no need to name it. But since he asked this, there must be a reason for it. Could it be that the Sanguine and the Earth Mother Church have some secret connection? Under Emlyn's expectant gaze, Ember slowly said, £8,000. Deal. The Moon, Emlyn said without hesitation. I don't have that much money now, but I will raise it as soon as possible. He had already made up his mind. This time when he went back, he would seriously tackle the dream and must defeat Gouda as soon as possible. Seeing that one transaction after another was reached, son, Derek, who had been holding back for a long time, organized his thoughts and said. During this time, I followed the exploration team led by the chief to Afternoon Town. This is the only way to the Giant King's court. This is the door that separates myth and reality. His opening successfully aroused the interest of the Tarot Club members, who all looked at Derek, waiting for the rest of the story in various postures. Derek omitted the less important experiences along the way and started directly from arriving at Afternoon Town, first describing the gloomy and dead appearance there, then talking about how the three-person team discovered the basement altar. And the information found in it regarding titles such as Dark Angel, Sorcerer and Rose Redemption. Among them, he specifically mentioned that when the clergyman said the three names, Sorcerer, Ouroboros, Medici, and was about to say the fourth name, he was burned into diffused black mist by a sudden transparent flame. Speaking of this, son, Derek turned sideways to look at the head of the bronze long table and asked devoutly, Mr. Fool, who tempted the Dark Angel, Sorcerer? Who does the fourth name represent? Why can't it be said? If it were before, Klein would most likely not be able to answer this question and could only muddle through. But now he already had a faint answer in his heart, because the owner of the fourth name is now a true god. Among the 8 King of Angels, Amen, Sorcerer, Medici, Ouroboros, and even Harabergen, each of their names could be read out without any danger. Because although they were powerful, they were ultimately just angels, not true gods. Even Medici and Harabergen had long since fallen, the former becoming a wraith, and the latter having no bones left. The only 3 names that could not be read out were Angel of Imagination, White Angel, and Wind Angel. The former was able to do so relying on the special uniqueness of the visionary pathway, while the latter two had become gods. Since that clergyman was burned to ashes, it was likely that he wanted to read out the true name of the White Angel. And if he wanted to read out the true name of the Wind Angel, he should have been struck dead by lightning. Of course, although he knew this, Klein did not intend to say it. After all, he was not an encyclopedia, and it was impossible to answer every question. That did not fit the setting of the Fool. Klein had a plan in mind, and with his right palm lightly resting on the armrest, his eyes held a meaningful smile as he said, Because it is a secret. Secret. Even the name itself is equivalent to a secret. Hanged Man, Alger instantly thought of many things and had some guesses. When the name itself becomes a secret, it means that this matter involves a true god. Because the previous one who received a similar warning from Mr. Fool was the Twilight Hermit Society. This organization is suspected of involving an angel. In that time, the Fool only warned them not to say that name outside, but since he told them about this organization, it showed that Mr. Fool himself did not take it to heart. In this time, the Fool could not even give a name. The answer is already very obvious. Seeing little, son, Derek confused and bewildered, unable to understand Mr. Fool's meaningful hint, Hanged Man, Alger took the initiative to explain. Those 2 names may represent 2 gods respectively, which is why they are unspeakable. The hermit was silent for a moment, and then softly said, Perhaps it was the true creator who tempted the Dark Angel, Sorcerer, leading to the fall of several King of Angels and the residents of Afternoon Town, bringing a huge disaster. Therefore, only he has temples and statues in your forsaken land of the gods. The King of Angels corresponding to the fourth name may have gained immense benefits in the disaster and successfully advanced to become a true god. Chapter 274 Loyalty. The hermit Katlia paused, as she noticed that everyone else's expressions seemed a little subtle. Did I say something wrong? The hermit was momentarily stunned, feeling a bit strange inside. Her conjectures were based on analyses made from existing information. Although she didn't believe what she knew was the absolute truth of the matter, it was at least the most reasonable guess at present. Mr. Hanged Man shook his head, denying it. It can't be the true creator. Why? The hermit Katlia slightly furrowed her brows. She didn't think Mr. Hanged Man was targeting her because of past events, but it seemed the Tarot Club possessed secrets she wasn't aware of. Mr. Hanged Man didn't hide anything and explained. Sun once participated in the investigation of the true creator's temple and discovered many murals inside. The murals show that the temple builders believed the statue represented the creator of everything, the omnipotent and omniscient God. They believed the creator had not abandoned that land, but instead, when the great catastrophe arrived, he helped them bear the vast majority of their sins, thus changing from standing upright to being hanged, from walking freely to being nailed to a cross, and shedding blood in their place. The hermit Katlia understood the meaning he wanted to convey. The true creator is the omnipotent and omniscient creator worshipped by the City of Silver. However, this conclusion was derived from the content of the murals in the true creator's temple, and those murals could very likely be the true creator deliberately glorifying himself, lacking sufficient credibility. This is not uncommon. Even the churches of the 7 gods today have similar descriptions in their scriptures. Eternal blazing sun, Lord of Storms, and God of Knowledge and Wisdom were born from the Creator's spirit. For example, the Evernight goddess is the Crimson Lord, symbolizing the red moon, and the red moon was formed from one of the Creator's eyes. Besides these, the churches of the Earth Mother and the God of Combat also have similar descriptions. Only the God of Steam and Machinery was born too late to find a reason to be connected to the Creator. The hermit didn't believe the descriptions in these scriptures, nor did she believe the 6 gods really had any connection to the Creator, so she also remained skeptical about the conclusion that the true Creator was the Creator. But since Mr. Hanged Man proactively brought up this conjecture, she wouldn't completely dismiss it. Because the other party might possess some conclusive evidence. Klein listened to their debate, also falling into deep thought. Rose Redemption, True Creator, Sorcerer. Regarding the matter of the true Creator being the Creator, worshipped by the City of Silver, he actually had no doubts. Firstly, this conclusion was proposed by Ember, who personally experienced that era. The conclusion he gave was undoubtedly more accurate than their guesses. Secondly, Klein himself had corroborating evidence from other sources. For example, he clearly remembered the Red Angel Medici's wraith once saying, "Rose Redemption has a close relationship with the birth of the true Creator." Some individuals you absolutely cannot imagine were once members of Rose Redemption, but later left the organization. As long as you can find an organization that believes in the true Creator, and trace it down, you will eventually come into contact with Rose Redemption. For another example, during the process of scheming to hunt down the sea god Cavatua, Klein accidentally entered an ancient elf ruin. The hall of the ruin had almost completely collapsed, and most of the murals were broken and disappeared because of this, but half a mural still remained, the content of which was a confrontation between 2 figures. Looking down upon his enemy from above was a man stepping on waves, topped with dark clouds, and draped in a storm. He had relatively soft outlines, leaning towards the oriental charm of Klein's previous life, and held a spear composed purely of lightning. The background was the ocean that submerged everything. Below this man was a person wearing a simple white robe. His face was indistinct, making it difficult to discern his age, only barely showing that he was male. Behind the head of the person in the classical white robe was a halo, quietly emitting radiance, like a sun. At his feet, there was a phantom circle divided into 12 sections, each containing symbols representing different times. Behind him was hidden a shadow that resembled a curtain, within which an eye seemed to be silently peering outwards. At that time, with his solid foundation in mysticism and rich knowledge from various sources, Klein quickly identified the identities of these 2 people. The former, who held the authority over waves, storms, dark clouds, and lightning, was undoubtedly one of the ancient gods, the elven king Sunyasolam. And the latter was the ancient sun god who killed the ancient gods one by one, reclaiming their authorities. The outcome of this great battle was the ancient sun god successfully killing the elven king Sunyasolam and reclaiming the tyrant authority. This is beyond doubt. But Klein's focus wasn't here, but on the authority the ancient sun god possessed at that time. Behind his head was a halo, quietly emitting radiance, like a sun. This was the authority of the sun. At his feet, there was a phantom circle divided into 12 sections, each containing symbols representing different times. This corresponded to the Worm of Time, an authority identical to Amon's. And most importantly, behind him was hidden a shadow that resembled a curtain, within which an eye seemed to be silently peering outwards. This corresponded precisely to the authority of the true Creator. In the commonly circulated images of the true Creator, the most frequent are the hanged giant and the eye behind the shadow curtain. And by combining all these clues, a relatively accurate conclusion can be drawn. Before the great battle with the Elven King, the ancient sun god already possessed the sun, hanged man, and worm of time pathways. In the process of defeating the ancient gods, he successively reclaimed the authorities of the storm, god of combat, concealment, and many other pathways. By this time, the ancient sun god had already grasped the authorities of nearly 10 pathways, showing how powerful he was. But in order to resist the revival of the first, he distributed a portion of his power through procreation. The concealment pathway transformed into Adam, and the worm of time pathway transformed into Amen. After realizing that this was still not enough to resist the gradually reviving the first, the ancient sun god established Rose Redemption, with the goal of killing himself. Little Sun learned about the organization, Rose Redemption, from the murals in the True Creator's temple, and now, during the exploration of Afternoon Town, he further confirmed the founders of Rose Redemption. Fate Angel, Ouroboros. Red Angel, Medici. Dark Angel, Sorcerer. In the underground altar of Afternoon Town, it was clearly recorded that these 3 were the founders of Rose Redemption. Among these three kings of angels, the Red Angel Medici was loyal to the true creator unto death, while the Fate Angel Ouroboros still serves the true creator's side to this day. Although the Dark Angel Saucerier's name was erased for unknown reasons, he was likely also loyal to the ancient sun god. And the reason he suddenly disappeared is likely because the Dark Angel died in that betrayal while protecting the ancient sun god or the true creator. If so, then these three never betrayed the ancient sun god from beginning to end. It's no wonder the ancient sun god gave them great trust, allowing them to secretly contact others to kill himself. The first half of the plan went smoothly. With the ancient sun god's tacit permission, more and more gods and kings of angels joined, Rose Redemption. In order to kill the ancient sun god, Rose Redemption, and the ancient sun god engaged in a great battle. This battle resulted in the birth of the god war ruins and turned the forsaken land of the gods into scorched earth. In the ancient sun god's original plan, the true creator should have inherited everything from him. However, as soon as he died, someone couldn't wait to betray him. The storm authority was snatched by the wind angel, the sun authority was snatched by the white angel. Ultimately, all that was left for the true creator was the hanged man authority. The current world structure was thus established and has continued to this day. The Lord of Storms, eternal blazing sun, and the unknown god of knowledge and wisdom are all betrayers, yet they are hostile to each other, branding each other's followers as heretics, who are executed upon discovery. The Evernight goddess, Earth Mother, and god of combat, as accomplices, do not help each other and are even hostile to each other. But when it comes to dealing with the true creator, the six gods are surprisingly united. The true creator, who had fallen to the true god level, was unable to reclaim the stolen authorities, and couldn't even gain a foothold under the combined suppression of the six gods, having to flee to the forsaken land of the gods, only able to secretly develop followers in private. Terribly miserable. Although Klein's relationship with the true creator was very bad, if not irreconcilable, at least they were mortal enemies. But at this moment, he still couldn't help but mourn for this one in his heart for 2 seconds. Putting himself in his shoes, it would be like him, the fool, in order to resist the Celestial Worthies revival, having the members of the Tarot Club kill him, and then having Mr. World inherit everything from the fool. As a result, he was betrayed midway, and Mr. Hanged Man and others snatched the fool's authority. Although Mr. World miraculously survived, his strength was not even comparable to Mr. Hanged Man's. Just imagining it for a moment, Klein felt uncomfortable. And the true creator is currently in such a predicament, he is the one who is most uncomfortable. Klein even worried that the true creator might not be able to help but find a deserted place to cry secretly. Meanwhile, Sun was clearly more focused on another matter, and he asked with some concern. Mr. Fool, is the key to leaving the forsaken land of the gods really in the Giant King's court? After such a long time, he had accepted Mr. Hanged Man's statement that the area where the City of Silver was located was the forsaken land of the gods. As for the relationship between the creator and the true creator, he actually already had a conclusion, but he didn't want to think about these things for the time being. Firstly, he still found it somewhat difficult to accept. Secondly, although faith is very important, survival is the primary need of civilization. That's what I think, but the problem is, I can't be sure. Klein felt a little helpless. To enter the forsaken land of the gods, one must go deep into the God War ruins, find a specific location surrounded by danger and strangeness, and then, in the dream brought by night, open the passage hidden within the projection of the Giant King's court by chanting the honorific name of the creator of the City of Silver. Then, by entering through the dream, one can bring the body and ship through the mist woven with reality and illusion, reaching the coast of the forsaken land of the gods. The key to entering the forsaken land of the gods is the projection of the Giant King's court, so thinking in reverse, the key to leaving the forsaken land of the gods should also be in the Giant King's court. But all of this is conjecture, with no way to confirm. Moreover, it's not that difficult for Little Sun to leave the forsaken land of the gods. Klein subtly glanced at the lovers on the second seat to his right. For Klein himself, how to enter the forsaken land of the gods is not a big problem. As long as he is willing, after advancing to sequence 4 and truly gaining a certain level of divinity, he can have Little Sun arrange a descent or bestowal ritual and go there directly. And Ember doesn't need to wait for sequence 4, he can go there at any time. In fact, Ember had already planned to go to the forsaken land of the gods as early as Amon's first invasion of the Fool. However, that time, there was nothing wrong with the space, but there was a slight error in time. He did appear in the forsaken land of the gods, but it was the forsaken land of the gods from a few thousand years ago. Thinking of this, Klein chuckled in a relaxed manner. Yes, and no. Little Sun was stunned for a moment, his pure mind couldn't comprehend this answer immediately. Mr. Hanged Man, who had perfect reading comprehension, kindly translated. Mr. Fool means that it is possible to leave the forsaken land of the gods through the giant king's court, but it is not the only method. Not the only one. Sun immediately understood. The City of Silver can leave the forsaken land of the gods by exploring the giant king's court, but this can only be achieved through their own efforts. However, if they ask for Mr. Fool's help, it might not be so troublesome. The only question was, how should he ask Mr. Fool to act? Mr. Fool adheres to the principle of equivalent exchange, but he clearly doesn't have enough value to make Mr. Fool save the entire City of Silver. Justice Audrey asked softly, Mr. Sun, perhaps you can try asking others in the City of Silver to believe in Mr. Fool. Sun was stunned for a moment, and quickly understood what justice meant. Mr. Fool has no obligation to save the City of Silver because the City of Silver is not directly related to Mr. Fool. But if the City of Silver believes in Mr. Fool, then perhaps they, as Mr. Fool's believers, will have a chance to be saved. But, Sun said with some difficulty, the Grand Elder and the others won't agree. For thousands of years, the City of Silver has always believed in the omnipotent and omniscient Creator. It is simply impossible to change their faith suddenly. Mr. Hanged Man countered, if your faith in that Lord is truly pious enough, then why don't you convert to the true Creator? Sun fell silent. The omnipotent and omniscient Creator is dead, only the true Creator remains. If they truly believed in that Lord, converting to the true Creator would be true loyalty. But this was also impossible. The City of Silver would not believe that the true Creator was the Lord they worshipped, and he personally couldn't accept it either. If he explained the situation clearly to the Grand Elder and the others, compared to the true Creator, believing in Mr. Fool might not be completely unacceptable. Chapter 275, Like a Lunatic. The Tarot Club ended. Watching the blurry figures disappear before his eyes, Klein didn't rush to leave. He conjured parchment and a pot-bellied steel pen, writing down a divination statement. The hope of my advancement to sequence 4. Putting down the pen, Klein held the parchment, leaned back against the chair, closed his eyes, entered a state of meditation, and silently chanted the divination statement. After 7 times, he quickly fell into slumber and arrived in the dream world. The gray world split open, and he saw a majestic mountain peak towering into the clouds. At the summit of the mountain, there was a collapsed and decayed palace, its walls covered in weeds and moss, with obvious holes. In the main hall of the palace, at the very top, was a huge stone-carved chair, inlaid with dim gold and jewels, mostly mottled and damaged. On this chair, which didn't seem prepared for humans, countless transparent maggots clustered together, densely intertwined, slowly wriggling, and constantly growing. Around the chair, muttering sounds penetrated through long periods of time and history, illusory, ethereal, and echoing endlessly. Hornichus, Phlegra, Hornichus, Phlegra, Hornichus, Phlegra. Upon hearing the muttering, Klein woke up with a slight frown. The main peak of the Hornichus Mountains, and I can see it more clearly and hear it better than before. This reminded him of the prophetic words of Queen Mystic Bernadette. Your destiny lies on the main peak of the Hornichus Mountains. Is this my destiny? No, my fate is determined by fire, not heaven. Klein uttered a rather Chunabu-like remark. With Ember helping, who cares about destiny? My rendezvous, draw. Special summon, come forth, Ember. The future sailed steadily through the undulating waves. Star Admiral, Catalia stood by the window, gazing at the vast, boundless scenery with complex emotions. The future had previously docked at Toscat Island. She didn't know if Queen Mystic was still on the ship now. Logically speaking, if the anomaly in her eyes was indeed caused by her, she should stay on the ship to observe the subsequent changes. But if she wasn't willing to see her, what could she do? Was she unwilling to see her, preferring instead to see Mr. World, who had only stayed on her ship for a short time? Catlia's eyes grew dimmer, but a soft, emotionless voice suddenly sounded beside her. Are you looking for me? Catlia turned around in surprise, looking at the tall lady who had appeared beside her at some point. At this moment, she was wearing an Intis-style women's shirt with large lace flowers at the collar, an indigo-patterned captain's uniform jacket over it, off-white trousers, and knee-high boots, and a tricorn hat with feathers. She was dressed like the leader of a pirate ship. She had long chestnut hair that fell naturally, straight eyebrows that extended just right, and deep blue eyes that seemed to contain a condensed ocean. She possessed striking beauty, but it wasn't this that was most eye-catching. The natural nobility in her demeanor and the aura of a great personage who had long held a high position were even more impressive. Catlia subconsciously even wanted to lower her head, avoiding eye contact. Catlia opened her mouth, seemingly wanting to say something, but quickly fell silent again. Bernadette said softly. What do you want to say? Catalia was silent for a long time before whispering. Something is wrong with my eyes. I offended one of the existences at that gathering. Bernadette's expression remained unchanged, and she said calmly. I didn't do it. Catalia pursed her lips. She also believed that Bernadette didn't do it. But who could it be? Bernadette suddenly reached out and pointed. He did it. He. Catalia's heart tightened, and she instinctively turned towards the direction Bernadette was pointing. Above the bookshelf, there was a small blue doll. The doll, which had been looking out the window, suddenly turned its head to look at them and asked. What did you see? Catalia's mood instantly became tense. Because she remembered that when Bernadette referred to this doll, she used, he. He was at least an angel, and possibly even a true god. Bernadette said calmly. You go out first, I'll talk to him. But, leave. Bernadette's voice was still calm, but there was a hint of unquestionable authority. Catalia remained silent and backed out of the captain's cabin. Bernadette gazed at the doll on top of the bookshelf and whispered. Isn't having me enough? The small doll said calmly. Every tool has its limits. Bernadette's heart sank, and she said in a low voice. But she doesn't know anything. You're just going to kill her this way. She's not dead. The small doll looked down at her and said indifferently. Or rather, precisely because she doesn't know anything, she didn't die. Bernadette fell silent, unsure if she was agreeing with her words or thinking about how to refute. Bernadette whispered. Even if she's not dead, that person will warn her. She won't be able to give you the information you want. It's enough. The small doll's tone remained unchanged. I've already gotten what I wanted. She has no more use. Hearing these words, Bernadette's expression relaxed instead, and she changed the subject. When are we leaving? The small doll said calmly. Anytime. Then today, Bernadette said without hesitation. The small doll clasped its 4 hands together and said softly. You shouldn't question me, you should thank me. Thank. Bernadette suddenly felt a little absurd. Thank for what? Thank me for making you and your mother stand on the same side. Bernadette immediately denied it. She's not my daughter, and I'm not her mother. The small doll nodded gently. I believe you. Backland, North District, St. Samuel Cathedral. Believers coming to pray walked through the quiet corridor, bathed in the sunlight piercing through the high stained glass windows, and arrived at the main prayer hall. It was quite dim here, making one's mood involuntarily become peaceful. Most believers found a seat on the long benches on either side and began to pray with closed eyes, concentrating fully. But a young man in a double-breasted suit walked directly past the benches to the bishop standing in front of the altar. That bishop wore a double-breasted black clergyman's robe. He looked about 40 years old, with deep blue eyes, a thin face, and features that weren't particularly handsome but somehow made him look pleasant. He seemed to recognize Ember and smiled. Mr. I Shu, I am Bishop Electra. Is there anything I can do for you? Ember slowly said. I want to see Archbishop St. Anthony. Electra said helplessly. I'm afraid Archbishop St. Anthony is temporarily not in Backland. Not here. Ember frowned slightly. Yes. Electra nodded gently. An underground ruin was discovered in the suburbs of Backland, and the 3 great churches have each sent beyonders to investigate. Just today, something important seems to have been found there, and Archbishop St. Anthony went there personally upon receiving the news. Coincidence. This word suddenly popped into Ember's mind. He had just returned, and Archbishop St. Anthony happened to be out of Backland. Was this a bit too coincidental? Ember keenly realized that something was wrong, but he didn't make a fuss. Instead, he said, I need to enter the Chinese gate to retrieve a sealed artifact. I don't have the authority for that. Bishop Electra hesitated. He knew that Ember had a special status among the Nighthawks and was highly regarded by Archbishop St. Anthony, but he didn't have the authority to decide whether Ember could enter the Chinese gate. Electra cautiously inquired, Do you have a token left by Archbishop St. Anthony? Ember flipped his hand, and a badge appeared in his palm. Is this all right? Electra's expression changed slightly, and he immediately recognized the badge's true form, the holy emblem of the night. At first glance, this badge seemed no different from the holy emblems seen throughout the church. But the significance they represented was completely different. Electra's face immediately became solemn, and he quickly said, Viscount Ash Black, please follow me. Electra called another bishop and asked him to preside over the prayer in his place. He himself led Ember quickly through the hall to the back of the church, heading towards the underground area. At the secret door of the underground area, a priest stood guard outside the door. When he saw Bishop Electra, he was clearly startled and asked respectfully but cautiously. Bishop Electra, is there something you need? Within the 7 gods churches, clergymen and nighthawks are 2 different systems. The former are responsible for preaching and guiding believers. The latter are responsible for more confidential and dangerous matters. Of course, although clergymen and nighthawks belong to different systems, their relationship is often quite close, and clergymen occasionally provide assistance when the nighthawks are short-handed. However, this situation underwent some changes 3 years ago. 3 years ago, the former Archbishop in Zangwil failed in his advancement to Sequence 4. Although he was not in mortal danger after failing the advancement under the goddess's protection, Zangwil showed no gratitude. Instead, relying on his special status, he deceived the guards, bypassed layers of protection, entered the Chinese gate, and stole a grade 0 sealed artifact. Since then, beyonders within the clergyman system have been treated more strictly. Under normal circumstances, clergymen other than the Archbishop are not allowed to enter the underground area, let alone approach the Chinese gate. And the clergyman system was content with this situation. They didn't resent the discriminatory treatment by the Nighthawks, at least there were no traitors like Zangwil among the Nighthawks. Not being allowed in the underground area was their deserved punishment. Electra was not surprised by the priest's attitude and didn't mind it. Instead, he explained, Viscount Ash Black has important business and needs to enter the Chinese gate to borrow a sealed artifact. The priest frowned tightly and didn't believe Electra's explanation, becoming even more vigilant. Not until he saw the holy emblem of the knight in Ember's hand. The priest's eyes immediately changed. He raised his right hand and tapped his chest 4 times clockwise, saying respectfully, Viscount Ash Black, may the goddess bless you. Praise the goddess, Ember replied, following local customs, and also drew a scarlet moon. He didn't stop, passing the priest and walking down the stairs step by step under the illumination of the lamps on both sides. Electra didn't follow. Even in a special situation, he still adhered to his duty and wouldn't step into the underground area. Ember had been to the underground area several times and was not unfamiliar with the environment here. Walking all the way to the intersection, after a brief identification, Ember turned and walked to the left. Just then, he saw a man wearing red gloves walking towards him. This man had black hair and green eyes, an outstanding appearance, and was dressed quite casually. It was Leonard Mitchell. Seeing Ember, Leonard Mitchell was clearly startled. Long time no see. Leonard Mitchell greeted him. Ember stopped and nodded slightly in response. Leonard Mitchell suddenly asked, How is Klein? Ember asked in return, Didn't he die? Leonard Mitchell was taken aback, then gave a self-deprecating smile. Yeah, he died. Look at my memory, I forgot again. Muttering to himself, Leonard Mitchell walked past Ember and continued straight ahead. Ember withdrew his gaze and walked all the way to the end. The iron-black double doors were heavy and cold, inscribed with 7 holy emblems, seemingly unshakable by anything. The Nighthawk on duty noticed Ember's arrival and was about to inquire when he saw the holy emblem shown by the other party. The Nighthawk's attitude immediately became respectful. Leaving the underground area and returning to the surface, Leonard Mitchell lowered his voice, seemingly muttering to himself. Old man, don't you think that guy is strange? After this period of investigation, he was increasingly certain that Sherlock Moriarty was Klein Moretti. It wasn't because both names contained Clee, nor because both names contained T. It was because of their extremely similar appearance and the coincidental timing of their appearances. Almost as soon as Klein died, this Sherlock detective suddenly appeared in Backland. He seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. No one knew his origin, and no one knew his past. And when Leonard wanted to investigate this great detective, the other party suddenly vanished without a trace, bringing all investigations to a halt and an end without resolution. But Leonard did make some discoveries. For example, he knew that Sherlock detective was acquainted with Ember. Perhaps Ember knew the truth about Klein's death, which was why he suddenly asked that question. Unfortunately, the other party didn't fall for it. The slightly aged voice in his mind echoed. What's strange? Don't talk to me. Ah, Leonard was stunned for a moment, his expression a little strange, and he asked doubtfully. Old man, what's wrong with you? The slightly aged voice sounded somewhat exasperated. Don't talk to me, you idiot. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.